The doors exploded open with a crack that silenced the entire hall. Every eye turned as a figure stepped from the darkness, broad-shouldered, scarred, moving like a predator among prey. He crossed the polished floor where perfect women stood in silk and lace, ignoring every painted smile. His boot stopped in front of the town's greatest shame, a scarred woman kneeling in humiliation. The room held its breath. Then he spoke two words that would shatter everything. I choose her. This is her story. Watch until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind that carved through Iron Ridge carried more than dust and the promise of winter. It carried judgment. It had for 7 years, ever since the night fire consumed the Vance household and left their only daughter with a face the town decided was too damaged to love. Elara Vance remembered beauty the way some people remember childhood homes, as something that existed once, in photographs and fading memory, before everything burned. She'd been 16 when the lantern fell, when the flames ate through the wooden beams of their modest but respectable house on the eastern edge of town. She'd been 17 when she realized the scars running from her left temple down across her cheek to her jaw weren't just physical markers, but social sentences. Now, at 23, she understood that Iron Ridge had no mercy for imperfection. The town itself sat in a valley carved between mountains that seemed to touch the sky, a frontier settlement built on iron ore and harder men. 2,000 souls called it home, though home was a generous word for a place where survival meant knowing your place and keeping it. The mine owners lived in painted houses on the hill. The merchants kept their shops on Main Street with its wooden sidewalks and gas lamps that glowed like dying stars at dusk. The workers and their families crowded into smaller dwellings that spread outward like ripples, getting poorer with each concentric ring. And at the very edge, in a one-room shack that leaked when it rained, lived the town's greatest cautionary tale. Elara pressed her palm against the scarred wood of her door, feeling the familiar grain beneath her fingers. Dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that would have been beautiful if she'd allowed herself to notice such things anymore. Beauty was a luxury for women who could afford to be seen. She pulled her shawl tight and stepped into the morning chill. The path from her shack to the town center was one she could walk blind. 6 days a week she made this journey before most of the town stirred, arriving at the bakery's back door where Mrs. Chen paid her in day-old bread and coins that barely covered her rent. It wasn't charity. Elara worked hard, kneading dough until her arms ached, scrubbing flour from every surface, hauling water from the well behind the shop. But it was the only work a marked woman could get. "You're late!" Mrs. Chen's voice cut through the pre-dawn quiet as Elara rounded the corner. The older woman stood with her arms crossed, her face set in its usual expression of practiced disappointment. "The clock tower just struck 5, ma'am. Same as always." "Don't backtalk me, girl. Your kind doesn't get to backtalk." Mrs. Chen's eyes flicked to the scars, then away, as if the sight itself carried contagion. Inside, the ovens need stoking, and yesterday's dishes are still waiting. Elara nodded and slipped past her into the bakery's warm interior. The familiar sense of yeast and sugar wrapped around her like a threadbare blanket. She'd grown to love this place, not for the work itself, but for what it represented: purpose, no matter how small, a reason to wake up, a reason to survive another day. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when she heard the voices. "Can you believe they're actually going through with it again?" Sarah Mitchell's voice carried through from the front of the shop, where the early customers had started to gather. "After last year's spectacle? What choice does the town have?" That was Rebecca Stone, the banker's daughter, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Tradition is tradition. The courtship dance has been held every year for 50 years. We can't stop just because one unfortunate woman keeps showing up." Elara's hands stilled in the water. The courtship dance. Of course. How could she forget? The date was carved into her memory like the scars on her face. September 28th, exactly 1 week away. The night when every unmarried woman in Iron Ridge dressed in her finest and stood before the town's eligible men, waiting to be chosen. Or in Elara's case, waiting to be rejected. "I heard she's planning to attend again." Sarah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried perfectly through the wall. "Can you imagine? After 6 years of standing there while every single man refuses her, What kind of person subjects themselves to that kind of humiliation? The desperate kind, Rebecca answered. Though I suppose we should pity her. What else does she have? No family, no prospects, no future? At least when she stands there and gets rejected again, she can tell herself she tried. Their laughter cut through the wall like knives. Elara pulled her hands from the water and dried them slowly on her apron. Her reflection stared back at her from the bottom of a copper pot hanging on the wall, distorted, warped, but honest. The scars ran like rivers of hardened flesh down the left side of her face, pink and white against her naturally olive skin. The fire had taken her eyebrow, leaving the skin there smooth and strange. Her left eye had survived, but the lid drooped slightly, giving her a perpetual expression that people interpreted as either sadness or stupidity, depending on their mood. She'd been beautiful once. The photographs hidden in the bottom of her trunk proved it. A young girl with symmetrical features and bright eyes, the daughter of a mine foreman who'd had dreams of something better for his only child. But that girl had burned in the fire alongside her parents, leaving only this scarred survivor in her place. Elara! Mrs. Chen's bark shattered her reflection. Stop daydreaming and get these bread racks ready. The morning rush will be here any minute. The hours blurred together in a rhythm of heat and flour and exhaustion. By the time Elara stepped back into the midday sun, her arms ached and her dress was dusted white with flour that no amount of brushing could completely remove. Mrs. Chen had pressed 3 copper coins into her palm, today's wages, and a wrapped bundle that Elara knew without looking contained the unsold bread from 2 days ago, hard enough now to break teeth. She walked through town with her eyes down, a habit so ingrained she barely noticed she was doing it. The sidewalks were busier now, filled with the lunch hour crowd. Men in dusty work clothes headed toward the taverns. Women with shopping baskets moved between the stores. Children ran through the streets, their laughter sharp as breaking glass. No one met her eyes. No one ever did. Well, if it isn't Iron Ridge's favorite charity case. The voice stopped her cold. Elara looked up to find Marcus Webb leaning against the post outside the general store, his arms crossed and a smirk playing at his lips. 3 of his friends stood behind him, Connor, Jake, and Thomas. All sons of mine owners, all in their mid-20s, all participants in every courtship dance for the past 5 years. All of them had rejected her, publicly, repeatedly. Mr. Webb? Elara said quietly, moving to step around him. He shifted, blocking her path. Now don't be rude. We were just talking about you, wondering if you'd do us all the favor of not embarrassing yourself again this year. The dance is open to all unmarried women. The town charter says so. The town charter was written before anyone imagined a woman like you would try to participate. Marcus leaned closer, his breath smelling of tobacco and beer. Tell me something, Elara. What exactly goes through your mind when you stand there, watching every man in town choose someone else? When you're the last one left, standing alone while everyone stares, does some small part of you finally understand that nature marked you for a reason? Behind him, his friends laughed. A few passers-by had stopped to watch, their faces showing that particular kind of eager cruelty that accompanies public humiliation. Elara felt the familiar heat rising in her chest. Not shame, not anymore, but something harder and colder that she'd learned to carry like a stone in her pocket. She met Marcus's eyes directly, letting him see that whatever he thought he was doing, it wasn't breaking her. I understand that a man's worth isn't measured by his face, Mr. Webb. I keep hoping the same might eventually be true for women. She stepped around him, using his momentary surprise to slip past. Good day. She made it 3 steps before his voice followed her. You know what the real tragedy is? You actually believe someone might choose you. That's what makes it so entertaining to watch. Elara kept walking. She'd learned years ago that responding only fed them, gave them what they wanted. The trick was to keep moving, to put one foot in front of the other until she was out of range. The trick was to survive. The trick was to never, ever let them see you break. By the time she reached her shack, the sun was high and merciless. Elara pushed open the door and stepped into the relative cool of her one-room home. It wasn't much. A narrow bed in one corner, a small stove that heated poorly in winter, a table barely big enough for one person, and a trunk that held everything she owned in the world. But it was hers. Private. A place where no one could stare or judge or mock. She set down her bundle of bread and sank onto the edge of her bed, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. 7 years. 7 years since the fire. 6 years since her first courtship dance, when she'd been 17 and still naive enough to believe that someone might see past the scars. That night had taught her the cruelest lesson of all, that hope was more dangerous than despair. But she kept going back. Every year she told herself it would be the last time. Every year she swore she'd finally accept her place and stop reaching for something the town had made clear she would never have. And every year when September came around, she found herself pulling out the dress she'd worn that first time, letting out the seams a little to accommodate the muscles she'd built from hard work, and making the walk to the town hall. Because the alternative was admitting they were right. That she was exactly what they said she was, unmarriageable, untouchable, unworthy of basic human dignity. And Elara Vance would die before she gave them that satisfaction. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She stood, surprised. Visitors were rarer than rain in summer. Through the thin wood, she could make out a silhouette she didn't recognize. Tall, broad, unfamiliar. "Miss Vance?" The voice was deep, rough-edged. "I'm looking for the woman who lives here." Elara cracked the door open, keeping the scarred side of her face angled away by instinct. "I'm Elara Vance. Can I help you?" The man on her doorstep looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway, and hands that could probably crush stone. His face was weathered and hard, with a scar running through his left eyebrow and eyes the color of winter ice. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore clothes that had seen hard use, leather, wool, and canvas, all in shades of brown and gray that would blend into forest shadows. "My name's Ronan Hale. I live up in the high country about 20 miles north. I'm here buying supplies, and someone told me you do laundry work." Elara blinked, surprised. She did take in washing sometimes, when people would trust her with their clothes, but it was sporadic work. Most women preferred to do their own rather than let the marked woman touch their things. Yes, sometimes. It's 2 copper per bundle, and I can have it back to you in 3 days if the weather holds." "That'll work." He pulled a sack from his shoulder and held it out. "These need cleaning. I'll pay 3 copper if you can have them ready by tomorrow evening. I'm heading back up mountain the day after." 3 copper for 1 day's work. Elara reached for the sack, trying not to let her desperation show. "I can do that. Where should I deliver them?" "I'm staying at the boarding house on 4th Street. Just leave them with Mrs. Patterson." He paused, his eyes moving over her face with a directness that made her want to turn away. But there was something different in his gaze. Not pity, not disgust, just assessment. Like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. "You'll have them tomorrow," Elara said firmly, pulling the sack inside. He nodded once and turned to leave, then paused. "They talk about you in town, the people in the shops." Elara's hands tightened on the sack. "People always talk. They say cruel things, stupid things." He looked back at her, those ice-blue eyes steady. "For what it's worth, I've seen men die in the mountains with prettier faces and weaker spirits than yours. Scars just mean you survived something, nothing to be ashamed of." Before she could respond, he was walking away, his long strides eating up the distance back toward town. Elara stood in her doorway, the sack of laundry in her arms, and tried to remember the last time anyone had said anything kind to her. She couldn't. That night, she worked by lamplight, scrubbing the mountain man's clothes in the basin behind her shack. They were well made, but worn, and they smelled of pine smoke and something wild she couldn't quite name. As she worked, her mind kept returning to his words. Scars just mean you survived something. It was such a simple statement, but it reframed everything. For 7 years, she'd let the town convince her that her scars were a mark of unworthiness. But what if they were actually proof of strength? What if surviving the fire that killed her parents, enduring 7 years of mockery and isolation, showing up to that dance year after year despite the guaranteed humiliation, what if all of that wasn't weakness, but its own kind of courage? The thought felt dangerous, radical, like picking up a weapon she didn't know how to use. The next day, she delivered the laundry to Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house, who looked at her with the usual mix of suspicion and disdain, but accepted the bundle and pressed 3 copper coins into her palm. Elara walked home with her head a little higher than usual, the mountain man's words still echoing in her mind. She didn't see Ronan Hale again that trip, but something had shifted inside her, like a door opening in a long-sealed room. The week passed in its familiar rhythm. Work at the bakery, errands around town, isolation in her shack. The weather turned colder as September aged toward October, and the aspens on the mountain slopes blazed gold and red like the town was on fire. And then, almost before she was ready, it was September 27th, the day before the courtship dance. Elara stood in front of her small mirror, studying her reflection by lamplight. She'd pulled out the dress, dark blue cotton, simple but clean, with long sleeves and a high collar that had been fashionable 7 years ago. It still fit, though tighter now across the shoulders from all the heavy lifting. Her hair, dark and straight, hung past her shoulders. She'd grown it long deliberately, hoping it might partially hide the scars. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow night she would walk into that town hall for the 7th time. She would stand with the other unmarried women, all of them young and pretty and whole. She would watch as men moved through the crowd, making their choices, offering their tokens of courtship. And she would stand alone at the end, rejected once more, while the entire town watched and whispered and judged. The smart thing would be to stay home, to finally accept what 7 years had proven beyond doubt, that she would never be chosen, that Iron Ridge had no place for a woman like her. But Elara Vance had learned that survival sometimes meant doing the hard thing, rather than the smart thing. She would go. She would stand there. And when it was over, when she walked home alone through streets filled with happy couples and pitying stares, she would hold her head high. Because if nothing else, her scars proved she was a survivor. And survivors didn't give up just because the road was hard. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Elara went through her usual routine at the bakery, but the building buzzed with an energy that set her teeth on edge. Every conversation circled back to the dance. Who would choose whom? What the women would wear? The betting pools some of the men had started about various likely matches. "I heard the mayor's son is finally going to propose to Rebecca Stone," Sarah Mitchell said, her voice carrying through to the back room where Elara was cleaning. "About time. They've been courting for 2 years." "What about Marcus Webb?" someone else asked. "Who do you think he'll choose?" "Amanda Price, probably. Though honestly, he could have anyone he wants. The Webb family practically owns half the mine." Laughter, gossip, the casual cruelty of people who'd never stood on the wrong side of judgment. Elara scrubbed harder, her hands moving in vicious circles. By the time Mrs. Chen dismissed her, the sun was already sinking toward the western peaks. The dance would begin at 8 o'clock, giving everyone time to go home, eat dinner, and prepare. Elara walked home through streets that seemed to shimmer with anticipation, past houses where women were probably pulling on their finest dresses and men were polishing their boots. At her shack, she stripped off her flour-dusted work clothes and washed using cold water from the basin, scrubbing away the day's sweat and grime. She dried herself and pulled on the blue dress, her fingers fumbling slightly with the buttons. Her hair she left down, brushing it until it gleamed in the lamplight. Finally, she stood before her small mirror and forced herself to look, really look, at what everyone else would see. A woman with strong shoulders and calloused hands, dark eyes that had learned not to expect kindness. And yes, scars that ran down the left side of her face like a map of survival. Scars just mean you survived something. Elara took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "You're a survivor," she whispered to her reflection. "They can't take that away from you." At 7:30, she stepped out into the September evening. The sky was deepening to purple, and the first stars were beginning to emerge. She could hear music drifting from the town hall. The musicians warming up, tuning their instruments. The path into town was already crowded with people heading to the dance, all of them dressed in their finest. Couples walked arm in arm. Families moved in clusters. Single women moved in giggling groups, their dresses swishing around their ankles. Elara walked alone. The town hall dominated the center of Iron Ridge, a 2-story wooden building with tall windows and a peaked roof. Light poured from every window, golden and inviting. The doors stood open and people streamed inside like moths to flame. Elara paused at the bottom of the steps, gathering her courage. "You really gonna do this again?" She turned to find Marcus Webb standing behind her, flanked as always by his friends. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Elara made in 6 months, his hair slicked back and his smile sharp as a knife. "It's a public dance," Elara said quietly. "I have as much right to be here as anyone." "Rights and wisdom are different things, sweetheart," He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Every year you do this. Every year you humiliate yourself. Don't you ever get tired of being the town joke?" Something cold and hard settled in Elara's chest. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. "I get tired of a lot of things, Mr. Webb, but I'm not the one who should be ashamed in this conversation." She turned and climbed the steps before he could respond, her heart hammering but her stride steady. Behind her, she heard him laugh, but it sounded forced, uncertain. Good. Inside, the town hall had been transformed. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over everything. Tables lined the walls, covered with food and punch bowls. The center of the room had been cleared for dancing, and already a few early couples were swaying to the music. At the far end of the room stood a raised platform where the town council sat, presiding over the evening's events. And along the eastern wall, like flowers in a garden, stood the unmarried women. Elara recognized all of them. Sarah Mitchell in pink silk, Rebecca Stone in cream lace, Amanda Price in green velvet. A dozen others, all young, all pretty, all whole. They clustered together, laughing and whispering, casting occasional glances toward the men who were beginning to gather on the opposite side of the room. Elara took her place at the very end of the line, near the corner where the shadows were deepest. Her spot, the place she'd occupied for 6 years running. Around her, the hall continued to fill. More families arrived, more couples, more single men who would soon begin the courtship ritual that was the evening's centerpiece. The music swelled, the laughter grew louder, the energy built like a storm about to break. And Elara stood in her corner, breathing steadily, preparing herself for what was coming. The mayor stepped onto the platform at exactly 8 o'clock, his rotund form barely contained by his formal suit. He raised his hands for silence, and the crowd gradually quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Iron Ridge's 51st annual courtship dance." His voice boomed across the hall, met with applause and cheers. "As is our tradition, tonight the eligible men of our community will have the opportunity to declare their interest in the eligible women. Each man will approach the lady of his choosing and present his token of courtship. Should the lady accept, they will share the first dance as a newly courting couple. Let us begin." More applause. More cheers. The musicians struck up a waltz and the ritual began. Elara watched as the first man, the mayor's son, as predicted, walked directly to Rebecca Stone. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and offered it with a formal bow. Rebecca accepted with a practiced smile, and they moved onto the dance floor to enthusiastic applause. One by one, the men made their choices. Each woman who was selected stepped away from the wall, accepted her token, and joined the growing number of couples on the dance floor. The line along the eastern wall grew shorter. Sarah Mitchell was chosen by a merchant's son, Amanda Price by a mine supervisor. A dozen others by men whose names Elara knew, but whose faces had long since blurred together in her memory. And with each selection, Elara felt the eyes of the crowd turning more and more toward her. Whispers spread like wildfire. Fingers pointed. People shifted positions to get a better view of the spectacle they all knew was coming. The line dwindled. 5 women. 4. 3. 2. And then Elara stood alone against the eastern wall, the only woman left unchosen, while the entire town hall held its breath and waited to see what she would do. This was the moment. This was always the moment. The point where she could either flee in shame or stand her ground and endure the final humiliation, when the mayor would announce that all interested men had made their selections, and Elara Vance, for the 7th year running, had been rejected by every single one of them. She lifted her chin, set her shoulders, and prepared to survive. But then the doors at the far end of the hall exploded open with a crack like thunder. Every head turned, the music stumbled and died. Even the couples on the dance floor froze mid-step. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the night, his form seeming to fill the entire frame. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then he stepped forward into the light, and Elara's breath caught in her throat. Ronan Hale. The mountain man walked into the courtship dance like he owned it, his ice-blue eyes sweeping across the room with the kind of casual dominance that made men step back and women stare. He wore the same rough clothes as before. No fancy suit, no polished boots, just leather and wool, and the unmistakable aura of someone who answered to no law but his own. He stopped in the center of the room, seemingly unbothered by the hundreds of eyes fixed on him. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the hall. I'm here for the courtship ritual. Someone want to tell me how this works? The mayor recovered first, his face flushing red. Sir, this is a private community event. If you're not a resident of Iron Ridge, the sign outside says public dance. I'm public. I'm here to dance. Ronan's gaze swept the room again, passing over the couples, the council, the remaining men who hadn't yet made their choices. Or is there some rule against mountain folk participating? Mutters rippled through the crowd. The mayor opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. No, of course not. Any eligible man may participate. It's just highly unusual. Good. Ronan turned and his eyes locked directly on Elara. The room went absolutely silent. He started walking toward her, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Every step brought him closer to the corner where she stood frozen, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. He can't be. He wouldn't. Not her, not in front of everyone. But he kept coming, kept walking, past Rebecca Stone, who watched with her mouth slightly open, past Amanda Price, who looked confused and vaguely offended, past every pretty, perfect, unmarked woman in the room, straight to Elara. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close she could see the scars on his hands, the weathering on his face, the absolute certainty in his gaze. Elara Vance, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, though the entire hall strained to hear. I'd like to court you, if you'll have me. The world tilted sideways. Elara opened her mouth, but no sound came out. This couldn't be happening. Men didn't choose her. Men rejected her. That was how it worked. That was how it always worked. I don't, she managed finally. I don't understand. It's simple. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. When he opened it, firelight caught on gold. Coins, Elara realized. A small fortune in gold coins. More money than she'd seen in years. He placed the pouch carefully in her hands. I'm claiming you as my intended. Do you accept? Behind him, the crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed in disbelief. Elara heard Marcus Webb's voice cutting through the chaos. This is absurd. You can't just... I can. Ronan didn't turn around, didn't take his eyes off Elara. The tradition says any eligible man can make his claim. I'm making mine. The only question that matters is her answer. Elara stared at the pouch in her hands, feeling the weight of the gold. Her mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 reasons why this couldn't be real. He was mocking her. He was playing some cruel joke. He was being paid by someone to humiliate her even more spectacularly than usual. But when she looked up and met his eyes, she saw none of those things. She saw patience, certainty, and something else, a kind of recognition, like he was seeing not what she'd been reduced to, but what she actually was. A survivor. Like him. Why? She whispered. Because you're the only woman in this room worth claiming. He said it simply, factually, like he was commenting on the weather. And in that moment, Elara Vance made a choice that would change everything. She closed her fingers around the pouch and nodded. I accept. The hall exploded. The sound that erupted from the crowd wasn't quite cheering and wasn't quite outrage. It was something uglier, a volatile mix of shock and fury and disbelief that filled the town hall like smoke from a wildfire. Elara felt it crash over her in waves, saw the faces of people she'd known her entire life twist into expressions she'd never seen before. Marcus Webb pushed through the crowd, his handsome face flushed dark red. This is a farce. You can't just walk in here and... I already did. Ronan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. He still hadn't turned around, still kept his body angled between Elara and the crowd, like he was shielding her from something dangerous. Unless you're saying the tradition doesn't apply to everyone equally, the tradition is for men of Iron Ridge. Marcus's voice climbed higher. For members of this community who've earned the right, show me where it says that. Ronan finally turned, and the movement was so controlled, so precise, that it silenced the hall more effectively than shouting could have. Show me the written rule that says a man needs your permission to court a woman. I'll wait. The mayor stumbled forward, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. Now, gentlemen, let's not cause a scene. Mr. Hale, while you're interest, is noted. Surely you can understand that this is highly irregular. What's irregular about following your own tradition? Ronan's ice-blue eyes swept the room, landing on each council member in turn. A man makes his claim. A woman accepts or refuses. Those are the only rules that matter. Or are you saying there are secret rules? Rules that only apply when someone you don't like tries to participate? Silence fell like a hammer. The mayor's mouth worked soundlessly. Around the room, people shifted uncomfortably, because Ronan had just called out the unspoken truth that everyone knew, but no one said, that Iron Ridge's traditions only applied as long as the right people were following them. She accepted, Ronan continued, his voice dropping to something quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. Which means, we're done here. Unless someone wants to challenge that directly? His gaze landed on Marcus, and the younger man actually took a step back. For all his bluster and his family's money, Marcus Webb had probably never faced actual violence in his privileged life. Ronan Hale, on the other hand, looked like violence was something he wore as comfortably as his leather coat. "This isn't over," Marcus said, but the words came out weak, defensive. "The council will hear about this. Your claim won't stand." "Then I guess we'll see." Ronan turned back to Elara and extended his hand. "Shall we dance?" Elara stared at his offered hand like it was a coiled snake. Her mind was still trying to catch up with what had just happened, with the weight of gold in her other hand and the sudden, terrifying shift in her reality. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to not trust this impossible thing that was happening. But beneath the fear ran something else, a hot thread of defiance that had kept her alive through 7 years of humiliation. If this was a trick, if this was some new form of cruelty, then fine. Let them have their laugh. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cower. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, rough, calloused, warm, and he led her onto the dance floor. The crowd parted like water, people stumbling over each other to get out of their way. The musicians, frozen in confusion until now, glanced at the mayor. He made a helpless gesture, and after a moment the music started again. Ronan's hand settled on her waist, and Elara felt her breath catch. She'd never been touched like this, with intention, with claim, with anything other than professional necessity. Through 7 years of isolation, her body had forgotten what it was like to be held. "Put your other hand on my shoulder," he said quietly, and she obeyed automatically. Then they were moving, and Elara realized with a start that he could actually dance. Not with the polished grace of the town's wealthy sons, but with a rough competence that suggested he'd learned the steps somewhere, somehow, in a past she knew nothing about. "Breathe," he murmured, and she realized she'd been holding her breath. They're all watching. Might as well give them something to really talk about. "Why are you doing this?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "I know enough." He spun her carefully, and she caught a glimpse of the crowd. Every face turned toward them, every eye locked on the spectacle of the mountain man and the marked woman. "I know you've got more spine than every man in this room combined. That counts for something where I come from." "Where you come from?" She looked up at him, trying to read the expression on his weathered face. "Where's that?" "Places where survival matters more than pretty words. Where you're judged by what you can do, not what you look like." His eyes flicked down to meet hers. "The mountains don't care about scars, Miss Vance. They only care if you're strong enough to survive them." "And you think I am?" "You're still standing after 7 years of this." He gestured with his chin at the crowd, at the hostile faces and whispered conversations. "Most people would have broken by now, left town, or worse. But you keep showing up, keep facing them down. That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength I respect." Elara felt something crack open in her chest, some hard shell she'd built around herself to survive. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked at her suffering and seen strength instead of failure. "I don't understand what you want from me," she whispered. "Right now? Just this dance. After that, we'll see." He pulled her a fraction closer, and she felt the solid warmth of him, the sense of absolute certainty he carried like armor. "But I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want you to feel like you owe me something. That pouch of gold? It's yours, whether this works out or not. No strings, no debt. You earned it just by surviving this place." "That's not how courtship tokens work." I don't care how they work in Iron Ridge. His voice was flat, final. Where I come from, a woman doesn't belong to a man just because he gives her money. You want to take the gold and tell me to leave you alone. That's your right. I won't fight it. Elara studied his face, looking for the lie, the trick, the hidden cruelty. But all she saw was honesty, rough and uncomfortable as mountain stone. Why me? She asked again, because she still couldn't make sense of it. There are a dozen women here who are prettier, younger, unmarked. Prettier is a matter of opinion, and I don't need pretty. The music swelled around them, and Ronan guided her through a turn that brought them face to face with Marcus Webb and Amanda Price, who'd finally joined the dancing. Marcus's expression was murderous. I need strong. I need someone who won't break when life gets hard. That's you. The song ended. Ronan stepped back and released her, but his eyes never left her face. Walk out with me, he said. Right now. Let them see you leave on your own terms, with your head high. Elara glanced around the hall. Every person was staring at them, some with shock, some with anger, some with the kind of hungry curiosity that came from witnessing a scandal. She saw Sarah Mitchell whispering to Rebecca Stone, saw the mayor in heated conversation with his council members, saw Mrs. Chen from the bakery watching with an expression that might have been grudging respect, and she saw Marcus Webb, his face twisted with fury, already moving toward them through the crowd. We need to leave, Ronan said, tracking her gaze. Now, before things get uglier. He was right. She could feel the violence building in the room like pressure before a storm. Too many men who saw her acceptance of Ronan's claim as a personal insult. Too much wounded pride and threatened social order. Okay, she said. Ronan took her hand again and started walking toward the door. People scattered out of their way, but Elara could hear the muttering growing louder, angrier. Behind them, Marcus's voice cut through the noise. You think you can just take what you want? This is our town, Mountain Man. Our rules. You don't get to come in here and… Ronan stopped, turned, and the look on his face made Marcus's words die in his throat. Your town. Your rules. Ronan's voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. Funny thing about rules, they only matter when everyone agrees to follow them, and I don't remember agreeing to anything. He paused, letting that sink in. Now, I'm walking out of here with my intended. Anyone who has a problem with that can say so right now, with their fists if they're feeling brave. Absolute silence. Elara watched as every man in the room suddenly found something else to look at. Marcus's face went from red to white, but he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't challenge. Because, for all their posturing and their pride, not one of them wanted to test themselves against the scarred stranger who moved like predator and spoke like he'd stared down worse things than angry townsmen. That's what I thought. Ronan turned back toward the door. Come on, Elara. Let's get some air. They walked out of the town hall into the September night, leaving behind a crowd that erupted into chaos the moment the door closed behind them. The cool air hit Elara's face like a slap, shocking her back into her body. Her legs felt unsteady, her heart hammered, and her hand still clutched the leather pouch of gold like a lifeline. The sounds of shouting followed them from the hall, muffled but intense. Keep walking, Ronan said, his hand still holding hers. Don't look back. Don't give them the satisfaction. They walked down the steps, through the gas-lit streets, past the houses where respectable families lived. Elara was acutely aware of faces in windows, curtains twitching, people watching this latest scandal unfold in real time. By morning, the whole town would know what had happened. By noon, the story would be so twisted and embellished that she probably wouldn't recognize it. Where are we going? She finally asked. Your place. I'm making sure you get home safely. He glanced at her. Unless you'd rather go somewhere else? No, home is fine. She paused. You're really walking away from this? From everything that just happened? I'm walking you home. That's different. They turned down the lane that led toward the edge of town, where her shack waited in its familiar isolation. What happens next is up to you. I don't understand what you mean. I mean exactly what I said earlier. The gold is yours. You don't owe me anything. If you want me to leave town tomorrow and never come back, I will. If you want to tell everyone this was a mistake, that's fine too. Your choice. Elara stopped walking, forcing him to stop too. Then why did you do it? Why claim me in front of everyone if you don't actually want… She couldn't finish the sentence. couldn't say the word me without her voice breaking. Ronan studied her face in the moonlight, and something in his expression softened. I did it because someone needed to. Because watching those people humiliate you year after year, it was wrong. Someone needed to show them that their judgment doesn't mean anything, that you're worth claiming, worth defending. He released her hand but didn't step away. But claiming you in public and forcing you into something you don't want, those are different things. I won't do the second one. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you work hard. I know you're kind. You cleaned my clothes better than anyone has in years, and you didn't ask questions about why a mountain man needed laundry done. I know you're brave because brave is the only word for what you did tonight. Walking into that hall, knowing what would happen, standing there through all of it. He shook his head. Most people don't have that kind of courage. Elara felt tears prickling behind her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She'd survived 7 years without crying, and she wasn't about to start now. I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn. Same thing, different words. A smile ghosted across his face, brief as summer lightning. Come on, let's get you home before some drunk idiot decides to play hero and cause trouble. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was different now, less charged, more companionable. When they reached her shack, Elara turned to face him, the gold pouch still clutched in her hand. Thank you, she said quietly, for what you did tonight, even if I don't fully understand it yet. Nothing to thank me for. I just did what should have been done years ago. He stepped back, creating distance. I'm leaving tomorrow afternoon, heading back up to my cabin. If you decide you want to see where this goes, you can come with me. If not, no hard feelings. Come with you? To the mountains? Elara's voice climbed higher. I can't just leave Iron Ridge. I have work. You have a job that pays you in stale bread and a town that treats you like garbage. His voice was gentle but honest. What exactly are you holding on to here? The question hit her like a physical blow because the answer was nothing. She had nothing here except survival, and survival wasn't the same as living. But leaving meant stepping into the unknown, trusting a stranger, gambling everything on a choice she couldn't take back. Think about it, Ronan said. I'm at the boarding house on 4th Street. If you decide to come, be there by noon. We need to be on the trail by 1 if we're going to make it to the first waypoint before dark. And if I don't come? Then I wish you well, Elara Vance. Use that gold to start somewhere new, somewhere better than this. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a kind of salute, then turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him back toward town. Elara stood outside her shack and watched until he disappeared into the darkness. Then she looked down at the pouch in her hand, feeling the weight of it, the possibility of it. She'd never held this much money in her life, never imagined holding it. Inside her shack, she lit the lamp and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the gold. There had to be at least 50 coins here, maybe more, enough to leave Iron Ridge and start over somewhere else. By passage on a stagecoach to a city where no one knew her, where her scars would be just another face in the crowd instead of a mark of shame. Or she could do something even crazier. She could trust the mountain man, could walk away from the only home she'd ever known and follow a stranger into the wilderness. The smart choice was obvious. Take the gold, buy a ticket, start fresh. But Elara had learned that smart choices and right choices weren't always the same thing. She pulled out her trunk and started packing. The night passed in a blur of decision and second-guessing. Elara sorted through her possessions, separating what mattered from what didn't. Her clothes, she'd need those. Her mother's photograph, the only one that survived the fire. A few books she'd collected over the years. The blanket her grandmother had made, threadbare now, but precious. Everything else could stay. The furniture wasn't hers anyway. It came with the shack. The dishes, the pots, the small accumulation of objects that made up her life, none of it meant enough to carry. By the time dawn broke, she had everything packed into 2 canvas bags that she could carry on her back. It wasn't much. 7 years of life distilled down to what could be stuffed into 2 bags. But maybe that was fitting. Maybe leaving with nothing was the only way to start with something. She walked to the bakery for the last time as the sun climbed over the eastern peaks. Mrs. Chen was already there, preparing the morning bread, her face set in its usual expression of disapproval. "You're late again," she started, but Elara cut her off. I'm quitting. I won't be coming back. Mrs. Chen's hand stilled in the dough. What? I'm leaving Iron Ridge. Today. I wanted to tell you in person rather than just disappearing. Elara pulled off her flour-dusted apron and folded it carefully. Thank you for the work. I know I wasn't your first choice for help, but I appreciated the opportunity. Leaving? Mrs. Chen's face cycled through confusion, understanding, and finally something that might have been grudging respect. Because of last night? Because of that mountain man? Because there's nothing left for me here. Elara met her eyes directly. There never really was. For a long moment, Mrs. Chen just stared at her. Then she wiped her hands on her own apron and crossed to the cash box. She pulled out a handful of copper coins and pressed them into Elara's palm. Your wages for the week, plus a little extra. Her voice was gruff, uncomfortable with the kindness. You worked hard, harder than most. I won't say I understood you, but I respected that you kept coming back. That took strength. Elara felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just be careful. Men like that, mountain men, they're not like the boys here in town. Life up there is hard, unforgiving. I know. Elara pocketed the coins. I think that's exactly what I need. She walked out of the bakery for the last time, into a morning that felt sharper and clearer than any she could remember. The town was waking up around her, people emerging from their houses, beginning their daily routines. Some stared at her as she passed. Some whispered. Word had spread fast, as it always did in Iron Ridge. But for once, Elara didn't care. Let them stare. Let them whisper. By this time tomorrow, she'd be 20 miles away in the high country, and their opinions would matter exactly as much as they always should have, which was not at all. She went home, collected her bags, and then stood in the doorway of her shack one last time. 7 years she'd lived here. 7 years of isolation and survival and slowly hardening into something strong enough to endure. Part of her wanted to feel sad about leaving, but all she felt was relief. The walk to the boarding house on 4th Street took 20 minutes. With each step, Elara felt lighter, like she was shedding weight she hadn't known she was carrying. The morning sun warmed her face. Birds sang in the trees. The mountains loomed in the distance, impossibly tall and somehow inviting. The boarding house was a neat 2-story building with a wraparound porch. Mrs. Patterson sat in a rocking chair knitting something with methodical precision. When she saw Elara approaching with her bags, her needles stopped moving. He's inside, she said without preamble. Room 6, top of the stairs. He's been ready since dawn. Thank you. Elara climbed the steps and knocked on room 6. The door opened immediately, and Ronan stood there, already dressed for travel, his own pack slung over one shoulder. When he saw her bags, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or satisfaction. You came. I came. Elara shifted her weight, suddenly uncertain. If the offer still stands. It stands. He stepped out into the hallway and closed the door behind him. You sure about this? Once we're on the trail, turning back gets harder. I'm sure. And she was. For the first time in 7 years, Elara was absolutely certain of something. Let's go. They walked through Iron Ridge together, the mountain man and the marked woman heading toward the northern trail that would take them up into the high country. People stopped and stared. Windows filled with faces. Elara heard her name whispered a dozen times before they reached the edge of town. And then they saw Marcus Webb. He stood in the middle of the road blocking their path, with Connor and Jake flanking him. All 3 men looked like they hadn't slept, their clothes rumpled and their faces hard with anger and alcohol. You're not leaving, Marcus said, his words slightly slurred. Not with her, not like this. Ronan's hand moved to Elara's shoulder, gently pushing her behind him. Move aside. Or what, you'll fight me? 3 against 1, mountain man. Even you can't win those odds. I don't need to win. I just need to hurt you badly enough that you don't get back up. Ronan's voice was perfectly calm, almost bored. Now move, before this gets ugly. Too late for that. Marcus pulled something from his pocket. A knife, short but wicked sharp. You come into our town, embarrass us in front of everyone, and think you can just walk away? That's not how this works. Connor and Jake pulled their own knives, and suddenly the morning air felt sharp with violence. Elara's heart hammered, but Ronan just sighed like this was an inconvenience rather than a threat. He shrugged off his pack and handed it to her. "Hold this, stay back." Then he turned to face the three men, his hands loose at his sides, his body radiating a kind of coiled readiness that made Elara think of mountain cats she'd seen in pictures. "Last chance, boys. Walk away." Marcus lunged. What happened next was so fast that Elara almost couldn't follow it. Ronan sidestepped Marcus's knife thrust, caught his wrist, and twisted. There was a crack of breaking bone and Marcus screamed, dropping the knife. Before Connor or Jake could react, Ronan had already moved. A brutal elbow to Connor's face that sent him stumbling backward, blood pouring from his nose. Then a low kick that swept Jake's legs out from under him. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds. Marcus clutched his broken wrist, whimpering. Connor was on his knees trying to stem the bleeding from his shattered nose. Jake hadn't even tried to get up. Just lay there on the dusty road, staring at the sky like he was trying to figure out what had happened. Ronan picked up Marcus's knife and tossed it into the weeds beside the road. Then he collected his pack from Elara and started walking, stepping over Jake like he was a fallen log. "Come on," he said to Elara. "We're burning daylight." They left the three men in the road behind them and walked out of Iron Ridge, heading north toward the mountains that rose like walls against the sky. Behind them, Elara could hear shouting, people running to help Marcus and his friends, the general chaos of a scandal reaching its peak. But she didn't look back, didn't slow down, just kept walking beside Ronan Hale, away from everything she'd known and toward something she couldn't yet imagine. "You broke his wrist," she said after they'd put a mile between themselves and the town. "He'll heal. Better than he deserves." Ronan glanced at her. "You all right?" "I think so. That was—" She couldn't find the words. "You moved so fast." Life in the mountains teaches you to be decisive. Hesitation gets you killed. They crested a small rise, and suddenly Iron Ridge was visible behind them, the whole town spread out in the valley below. "You want to stop? Take one last look?" Elara turned and stared at the place where she'd been born, where she'd suffered, where she'd survived. From this distance, it looked almost pretty. The buildings neat and orderly, smoke rising from chimneys, the morning sun painting everything gold. But she knew what lived beneath that pretty surface. The cruelty, the judgment, the crushing weight of other people's opinions. "No," she said. "I don't need to look back." "Good answer." Ronan adjusted his pack and started walking again. "It's about 8 hours to the first waypoint if we keep a steady pace. We'll camp there tonight, then push on to my cabin tomorrow. The trail gets steeper from here." They walked in silence for the next hour, following a path that climbed steadily into the foothills. The air grew cooler and thinner, pine trees replaced the aspens. The sounds of civilization faded behind them until all Elara could hear was their footsteps, their breathing, and the wind in the trees. It was the most peaceful sound she'd ever heard. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Ask. What made you come to town in the first place? You said you live up here, that you don't come down often. What changed?" Ronan was quiet for a long moment, and Elara thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I needed supplies. Salt, mostly. Coffee. Some things you can't make or hunt for yourself. I come down maybe twice a year, get what I need, get back to the high country as fast as possible." "You don't like people." "I like them fine, in small doses, from a distance." He pushed aside a low-hanging branch, holding it so it wouldn't snap back and hit her. Cities, towns, they make people soft. Make them forget what actually matters. Up here, life is simpler. You're either strong enough to survive or you're not. No politics, no social games, no pretending to be something you're not. Sounds lonely. Sometimes. But lonely is better than surrounded by people who make you feel alone. He glanced back at her. "I figure you understand that better than most." She did. For 7 years, she'd been surrounded by people every day and felt lonelier than she could bear. The isolation of her shack had been a relief, not a punishment. "So you saw me at the dance and just decided to intervene?" "I saw you before the dance, around town. Watched how people treated you." His voice hardened. "Watched those boys mock you outside the general store. Heard what they said. It reminded me of something." "Of what?" He was quiet again, and this time Elara was sure he wouldn't answer. But then he said, "My sister. She had a birthmark that covered half her face. Purple, impossible to hide. People treated her like you, like she was less than human because she didn't look the way they thought she should. She endured it for years before—" He trailed off. Before what? Before she couldn't anymore. She took herself up into the mountains one winter and didn't come back. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Elara could hear the weight beneath it. That was 10 years ago. I moved up here permanently after that. Figured if people couldn't learn to be decent, I didn't need to be around them. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. But when I saw you standing there in that hall, facing down the same cruelty my sister faced, I thought, maybe this time someone should do something about it. Maybe this time the story should end differently. Elara felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time she didn't fight them. She let them fall silently as they walked, mourning a girl she'd never known who'd suffered the same judgment, who'd made a different choice. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a different ending." "You're giving yourself a different ending. I'm just along for the walk." He stopped and pointed ahead where the trail split around a massive boulder. "We'll take the right fork. The left one looks easier, but it dead ends at a cliff face. A lot of things up here look easier than they are. Important to know the difference." They took the right fork, and the trail grew steeper. Elara felt her legs burning, her breath coming harder, but she pushed on. Behind her, Iron Ridge disappeared completely, swallowed by the mountains. Ahead of her, the peaks rose impossibly high, their summits lost in clouds. And beside her walked Ronan Hale, the mountain man who'd seen what no one else in Iron Ridge had been able to see, that her scars didn't define her worth, that survival itself was a form of strength. The afternoon sun climbed toward its peak, and they climbed with it, leaving the valley and everything in it behind. By the time the sun touched the western peaks, Elara's legs felt like they were made of lead, and her lungs burned with every breath. The trail had grown progressively steeper, winding through dense stands of pine and spruce that blocked the sky, then opening onto exposed rocky slopes where the wind cut like knives. She'd lost count of how many times she'd stumbled, caught herself, pushed on. The bags on her back seemed to gain weight with every mile. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, because complaining meant admitting weakness, and weakness meant going back. And going back meant 7 more years of humiliation in Iron Ridge. So she put one foot in front of the other and climbed. Ronan hadn't said much since his story about his sister. He moved with the easy efficiency of someone who knew these mountains intimately, pausing occasionally to check landmarks that Elara couldn't identify, adjusting their course with small corrections that probably saved miles. Once he'd stopped to refill their water bottles from a spring that bubbled out of the rocks, so cold it made Elara's teeth ache. Another time, he'd pointed out bear tracks pressed into the soft earth beside the trail, fresh enough that Elara could see the distinct impression of each claw. "Stay close," he'd said. "Make noise when we walk. Bears don't like surprises." Now, as the light began to fail, he finally stopped at a small clearing sheltered by an overhang of rock. A fire pit sat in the center, stones blackened by countless previous fires, and the ground had been cleared of debris. "This is the waypoint," Ronan said, shrugging off his pack. "We'll camp here tonight. There's a stream about 50 yards east if you need to wash up. I'll get a fire started." Elara dropped her bags and sat heavily on one of the rocks ringing the fire pit. Every muscle in her body screamed, her feet throbbed. Sweat had soaked through her dress despite the cool mountain air, and she could feel blisters forming on her heels where her boots had rubbed. "How much farther to your cabin?" she asked. 6 hours tomorrow if the weather holds. 4 if you're feeling strong." He knelt beside the fire pit and began arranging kindling with practiced hands. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "You're limping, and you've been breathing hard for the last hour." "I said I'm fine." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, defensive. "I can handle it." "I didn't say you couldn't." He struck flint against steel, sending sparks into the kindling. It caught on the third try, small flames licking upward. But there's no shame in admitting when something's hard. The mountains don't reward pride. They reward honesty. Elara watched him feed larger sticks into the growing fire, building it carefully, efficiently. "You must think I'm pathetic. A town girl who can barely make it one day on the trail." I think you're someone who's never done this before, and you're doing it anyway. That's the opposite of pathetic. He sat back on his heels, satisfied with the fire. My first time in the mountains, I couldn't walk for 3 days afterward. Everything hurt. I thought my legs might actually fall off. Really? Really, and I was 17, strong as an ox, and cocky enough to think I knew everything. A slight smile crossed his face. The mountains taught me different. They're good at that, teaching humility to people who need it. He pulled packages from his pack, dried meat, hard biscuits, something wrapped in cloth that turned out to be cheese. Not fancy food, but substantial. He divided it evenly and handed her half. Eat. You'll need your strength tomorrow. They ate in silence as the fire crackled and the darkness settled around them like a blanket. Above, through the gap in the trees, stars began to emerge, more stars than Elara had ever seen in her life. In Iron Ridge, the gas lamps and house lights washed out all but the brightest. Here, the sky blazed with them, thick as spilled salt, impossibly bright. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Wait until you see it from the cabin. No trees blocking the view, just open sky from horizon to horizon." Ronan leaned back against his pack, staring up. That's one thing the mountains give you that cities can't: perspective. Reminds you how small you are, how small everyone's problems are, in the grand scheme of things. Is that why you stay up here? To feel small? Partially. Also because up here I don't have to deal with people like Marcus Webb and his friends. Don't have to watch good people get ground down by bad ones. Don't have to bite my tongue when I see injustice and know that fighting it will just make things worse. He looked at her across the fire, his face half in shadow. You ever feel like that? Like the world would be better if you could just step away from it? Every day for the past 7 years. Then you understand. He stood and walked to the edge of the clearing, staring out into the darkness. I'm not a good man, Elara. I want you to know that before we go any further. I've killed people. Not many, but enough. Men who tried to rob me, men who threatened violence, men who gave me no choice. Up here, there's no law except what you make yourself. No sheriffs, no judges, no one to appeal to when things go wrong. You handle it yourself or you die. Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know what you're walking into. My cabin isn't some romantic hideaway. It's rough country, rough life, and the rules are different. If you're going to stay, you'll need to learn those rules. Need to get hard. He turned back to face her. I can teach you, but only if you're willing to learn. Teach me what? How to survive. How to hunt, track, trap. How to defend yourself. How to read weather and terrain. How to kill when you need to, and how to avoid needing to. He crossed back to the fire and crouched down, his eyes intense in the firelight. I claimed you in front of that whole town. That makes you mine in their eyes, which means anyone with a grudge against me might try to use you to get to me. You need to be able to protect yourself. The weight of his words settled over her like snow. She'd escaped Iron Ridge, but she'd walked straight into something potentially more dangerous. The difference was that here, the danger was honest. There were no social games, no hidden cruelties disguised as propriety. Just survival, stark and simple. I'm willing to learn, she said. Good. We'll start tomorrow after we reach the cabin. He pulled a blanket from his pack and tossed it to her. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Watch for what? Bears, mostly. Mountain lions. Men, if Marcus's father decides his son's broken wrist is worth organizing a hunting party over. He settled against a tree at the edge of the firelight, his rifle across his knees. Probably nothing will happen, but probably isn't the same as certain. Elara wrapped herself in the blanket and lay down near the fire, using her bag as a pillow. The ground was hard and unforgiving, nothing like her narrow bed in the shack. Every rock seemed to find her spine, her hip, her shoulder. But exhaustion was stronger than discomfort, and within minutes she felt herself drifting. She woke to Ronan's hand on her shoulder and his voice low in her ear. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Her eyes snapped open. The fire had burned down to coals, barely giving off light. Ronan knelt beside her, his body tense, his rifle in his other hand. He pointed with his chin toward the far edge of the clearing. At first, Elara saw nothing but darkness. Then the darkness moved. A massive shape detached itself from the shadows between the trees, broad, humped, moving with a kind of shambling power that made her breath catch. A bear, larger than anything she'd imagined, its fur catching what little light remained from the coals. "Don't run," Ronan breathed. "It's just curious. Let it look. Let it smell. If it charges, get behind me and stay there." The bear moved closer, its head swinging back and forth as it tested the air. Elara could hear its breathing now, heavy and wet, could see the gleam of its eyes. It stopped 10 feet from the fire pit, studying them with an intelligence that was somehow more terrifying than pure animal instinct. Ronan stood slowly, making himself as large as possible. "Get out of here!" he shouted suddenly, his voice booming through the clearing. "Go on! Get!" The bear reared up on its hind legs, and standing it had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. For a moment that stretched into eternity, it stood there, towering over them, deciding. Then it dropped back to all fours, huffed once, and ambled back into the trees. Within seconds, it had vanished as completely as if it had never been there at all. Elara realized she'd been holding her breath and let it out in a shaky exhale. That was a grizzly, female probably, based on the size. Males get even bigger. Ronan sat back down, though his posture remained alert. She was just checking to see if we had food worth stealing. When she realized we didn't, she moved on. Does that happen often? Often enough. That's why you never camp without someone on watch. He fed a few sticks into the coals, bringing the fire back to life. You did good. Stayed calm, stayed quiet. A lot of people would have panicked. I was too terrified to panic. Terror and courage aren't opposites. Courage is doing what needs to be done despite the terror. He looked at her across the renewed flames. You'll see a lot of things up here that scare you. The trick is not letting the fear control you. Elara thought about the past 7 years, about standing in that town hall year after year knowing what was coming, about walking through streets where everyone whispered and judged, about the constant grinding fear that she'd break, that she'd give them the satisfaction of seeing her destroyed. "I think I've been practicing that for a while now," she said. "I think you have." Ronan nodded. "Get some more sleep. I'll keep watch. We leave at first light." This time, when Elara closed her eyes, she didn't dream. She sank into darkness, so complete it felt like falling, and when she woke, the sky was beginning to gray with the approach of dawn. Ronan was already up, the fire rebuilt, coffee brewing in a battered pot he'd produced from his pack. The smell cut through the mountain air, rich and dark and impossibly good. "Morning," he said, handing her a tin cup filled with the steaming liquid. "We've got about an hour before the sun clears the peaks. Drink that, eat something, and we'll move out." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but Elara drank it gratefully, feeling warmth spread through her chest. They ate more dried meat and biscuits, packed up their belongings, and scattered the fire until no trace remained except the blackened stones of the pit. "Always leave a camp cleaner than you found it," Ronan said. "That way it's there for the next person who needs it." The second day's hike was harder than the first. The trail climbed relentlessly, switchbacking up slopes that seemed impossibly steep. Elara's blisters from yesterday had burst and reformed, each step sending sharp pain up her legs. Her shoulders ached from the pack straps, her lungs burned in the thin air. But she kept moving, kept climbing, because the alternative was admitting defeat, and she'd had enough of defeat to last a lifetime. Around mid-morning, they crested a ridge and Ronan stopped, pointing ahead. "There. That's home." Elara followed his gaze and saw in a high valley cupped between 3 peaks a small cabin. It sat beside a stream that caught the sunlight like scattered diamonds, surrounded by a clearing that had been carved from the forest. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. No, wait, there was no smoke. The cabin looked dark, abandoned. "You left it cold?" she asked. "I leave it cold whenever I go down to town. No point wasting wood when no one's there to enjoy the heat." He started down the slope toward the valley. "Come on, another hour and we're there." That last hour felt longer than the entire previous day. The trail descended into the valley, crossing the stream on a series of flat stones, then climbing slightly to the cabin itself. As they drew closer, Elara could see that it was larger than she'd first thought. Maybe 20 feet on a side, with real glass windows and a solid door that looked like it could withstand a siege. "I built it myself," Ronan said, seeing her examining it. "Took 2 years. Every log, every stone, every nail. It'll outlast me by 100 years if it's maintained properly. He pushed open the door and gestured her inside. The interior was dim after the bright mountain sunlight, but as her eyes adjusted, Elara saw a space that was rough but meticulously organized. A large fireplace dominated one wall, its stones fitted together with obvious skill. Shelves lined another wall, holding supplies and tools and books, more books than she'd expected. A bed frame in one corner supported a mattress stuffed with something that smelled like pine needles. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Cooking implements hung from hooks near the fireplace. Everything had its place, everything served a purpose, and there was nothing wasted or unnecessary. "It's not much," Ronan said, setting down his pack. "But it's weatherproof, warm, and defensible. That's what matters up here." "It's wonderful," Elara said, and meant it. The cabin radiated a sense of security that her shack in Iron Ridge had never possessed. This was a place built to last, built to protect, built by someone who understood what survival actually required. "The stream is clean. You can drink from it without boiling. There's an outhouse about 50 yards that way." He pointed. "The root cellar's accessed through that trap door. I've got supplies to last through winter and then some." He paused. "There's only one bed." Elara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd been so focused on escape, on survival, on the journey itself, that she hadn't let herself think about the practical implications of living with a man, of sleeping arrangements and privacy, and all the things that proper women were supposed to worry about. "I can sleep on the floor," she said quickly. "Don't be ridiculous. The bed's big enough for 2, and the nights here get cold. We'll figure it out." He crossed to the fireplace and began building a fire. "First priority is getting you cleaned up and those blisters treated. There's a basin outside, and I've got bandages in the medical kit. After that, we'll need to reinforce our supplies. I wasn't planning on feeding 2 people through winter. I can help with hunting, gathering, whatever you need." "I know, that's why you're here." He got the fire going and straightened. "But first, you need to rest. Your body's not used to this kind of work. Push too hard too fast and you'll injure yourself in ways that don't heal easy up here." Over the next few hours, Elara discovered that Ronan's version of resting was very different from hers. He showed her where everything was stored, explained the routine of the cabin, demonstrated how to draw water from the stream without disturbing the sediment. He cleaned and bandaged her blisters with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior, then made her soak her feet in cold stream water to reduce the swelling. "Tomorrow we'll start your real education," he said as they ate dinner, fresh trout he'd caught from the stream and roasted over the fire. "But tonight, just eat and sleep. Your body needs to recover." As darkness fell and the fire crackled, Elara felt a kind of peace settle over her that she hadn't experienced in years. The cabin was warm. Her stomach was full. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant ocean waves. And for the first time since the fire that had scarred her, she felt safe. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ronan looked up from where he was cleaning the dinner dishes. "For what?" "For this. For seeing me when no one else would. For giving me a chance at something different. You gave yourself the chance by being strong enough to take it. I just opened the door." He set aside the dishes and settled into the chair opposite her. "But you're welcome anyway." They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned down, and Elara felt something she'd thought was dead inside her begin to stir. Not hope, exactly. Hope felt too fragile, too easily crushed, but possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a life worth living somewhere beyond the narrow confines of what Iron Ridge had told her she deserved. When they finally went to bed, Ronan on one side, Elara on the other, a careful gap between them, she fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted beyond measure. And for the first time in 7 years, she slept without dreaming of fire. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. Ronan was already up, dressed, moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency. "Morning," he said when he saw her stirring. "How do you feel?" "Sore. Everywhere." She sat up carefully, testing her body. Every muscle protested. But alive. "Good. Drink this." He handed her coffee. "Then get dressed. Your education starts now." Over the next week, Elara learned what survival actually meant. Ronan was a patient but demanding teacher, showing her how to move through the forest without disturbing the wildlife, how to identify plants that could be eaten versus those that would kill her, how to read the signs that animals left behind. He taught her to shoot, first his rifle, then a smaller pistol he produced from somewhere, setting up targets against trees and making her practice until her shoulders ached and her ears rang. Again, he'd say when she missed, breathe out slowly, squeeze the trigger, don't pull it, the shot should surprise you. He taught her to use a knife, not for fighting, not yet, but for practical tasks. How to skin a rabbit, how to gut a fish, how to carve wood without taking off her own fingers. Her hands, already calloused from years of hard labor, developed new calluses, harder and deeper. Everything up here wants to cut you, burn you, poison you, or eat you, he said one afternoon as they practiced making fire without matches. The trick is learning to use those things before they use you. Fire warms you or it kills you, depends on who's in control. At night, after dinner, he'd pull books from his shelves and read to her by firelight. Not romance novels or poetry, but survival guides, accounts of mountain men and trappers, stories of people who'd carved lives out of wilderness through sheer will and skill. Elara absorbed every word, filing it away, building a new understanding of what strength actually meant. And slowly, day by day, she felt herself changing. Her body hardened. The soft places that 7 years of town living had left became lean and tough. Her reflexes sharpened. Her senses, dulled by years of trying not to be noticed, came alive. She could hear the difference between wind in pine versus wind in spruce. Could smell rain coming an hour before it arrived. Could see tracks in dirt that she would have walked over blind a week ago. But it was more than physical. Something inside her was shifting, too. The constant gnawing fear that had been her companion in Iron Ridge. That someone would say something cruel, do something hurtful, remind her of her place, began to fade. Up here, there was no one to judge her, no one to whisper behind their hands or turn away when she approached. Just the mountains and the sky, and Ronan, who looked at her like she was capable of anything if she just tried hard enough. "You're a natural," he said one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sun set behind the western peaks. "I've never seen anyone adapt this fast. I had good motivation, 7 years of it." She flexed her hands, studying the new calluses, the dirt under her nails that wouldn't quite wash out. "Do you ever go back? To wherever you came from before the mountains?" "No, nothing there for me anymore." His voice was flat, final. "The mountains are home now. Only home I need. Don't you miss it? Other people? Conversation? The sound of voices that aren't your own?" "Sometimes, but then I remember what came with those things. The politics, the judgment, the constant pressure to be something I wasn't. And I realize I don't miss it nearly as much as I thought I did." He looked at her. "Do you? Miss Iron Ridge?" Elara thought about it honestly. Did she miss the bakery's warmth in winter? The familiarity of streets she'd known since childhood? The graves of her parents in the town cemetery that she'd never visit again? "No," she said finally. "I miss what it could have been. What it should have been. But what it actually was, I don't miss that at all." "Good, because—" He stopped suddenly, his head cocked, listening. "What is it?" "Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast." He stood in one fluid motion and grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the cabin wall. "Get inside. Bar the door. Don't open it unless I tell you it's safe." "Ronan, now, Elara." The tone of his voice brooked no argument. Elara scrambled inside and dropped the heavy wooden bar across the door, then moved to the window where she could see the trail that led up to the cabin. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, pushing their horses hard. Even from a distance, even in the fading light, Elara recognized them. Marcus Webb, his father, Jonathan Webb, and the town sheriff, a man named Coleman who'd never bothered to hide his contempt for anyone who didn't have money or status. They reined in their horses 30 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a semicircle. Ronan stood in the clearing between them and the cabin, his rifle held casually but ready. "That's far enough," he called. "State your business." Jonathan Webb, older, grayer, but with the same cruel set to his mouth as his son, urged his horse forward a few steps. "You know our business, mountain man. You broke my son's wrist. You stole a woman from our town. You disrupted our sacred traditions. We're here to bring you both back to face justice." Justice, Ronan's voice dripped contempt. That's an interesting word coming from a man who runs his mine like a slave camp and pays his workers just enough to keep them from starving. Where was justice for them? You're not in a position to lecture me on morality. You're a squatter on public land, living like an animal, and you've corrupted an innocent woman. Innocent woman? Ronan laughed, harsh and ugly. You mean the woman your entire town tormented for 7 years? The woman your son and his friends publicly humiliated every chance they got? That innocent woman? She knew her place, Marcus shouted, his left arm in a sling. She should have stayed in it. Her place, Ronan repeated slowly, was anywhere she chose to be, same as anyone else. You don't get to decide that for her. Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. Be that as it may, Mr. Hale, you assaulted 3 men of Iron Ridge. That's a crime. I have warrants for both your arrest and the woman's return. Your warrants don't mean anything up here. This is federal land. You have no jurisdiction. We have the right to pursue criminals. I'm not a criminal. I defended myself against 3 armed men who attacked me with knives. Any judge would call that self-defense. Ronan's voice went cold. And Elara came with me of her own free will. You have no right to take her anywhere. She's not in her right mind, Jonathan said. You've clearly coerced her, manipulated her. Why don't you ask her yourself? Ronan called over his shoulder. Elara, come out here. Tell these men what you want. Inside the cabin, Elara's hands shook as she lifted the bar and stepped outside. All 3 men's eyes fixed on her immediately, and she felt the old familiar weight of judgment trying to settle on her shoulders. But it felt different now. Lighter. Less real. Miss Vance, Sheriff Coleman said, his voice taking on a falsely gentle tone. Are you here against your will? Has this man threatened you or harmed you in any way? No. Her voice came out stronger than she'd expected. I'm here because I chose to be. You can't choose this, Marcus said, his face twisting. You're not thinking clearly. He's done something to you, filled your head with lies. The only lies I was ever told were in Iron Ridge, Elara said, and felt power in the words. You told me I was worthless, that I deserved to be alone, that my scars made me less than human. Those were the lies, Marcus. Not anything Ronan said. See? See how he's corrupted her? Jonathan Webb's face flushed red. She's speaking nonsense, Sheriff. Clearly she's not capable of making rational decisions. She sounds pretty rational to me, Ronan cut in. She made a choice. You don't like that choice. That's your problem, not hers. This isn't over. Jonathan's voice went low and dangerous. You think you can hide up here forever? We'll be back. With more men. With federal marshals if we have to. And when we come, you won't have any way out. Then I guess we'll deal with that when it happens. Ronan raised his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at them, but making the threat clear. Now get off my land. You've got about an hour of light left to make it back to the tree line. After that, these mountains belong to things that don't care about your money or your warrants. For a long moment, no one moved. The horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension. Then Sheriff Coleman tugged on his reins. Let's go. We've done what we came to do. Confirmed they're here. We'll come back with proper authority. This isn't finished, Marcus said, his eyes locked on Elara with pure hatred. You'll regret this. Both of you. They turned their horses and rode back the way they'd come, disappearing into the trees. Ronan stood watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then finally lowered his rifle. Well, he said, that complicates things. Elara felt her knees go weak and sat down hard on the porch steps. They'll really come back? Probably. Jonathan Webb is the kind of man who can't stand losing, and his son's pride is wounded. Ronan sat beside her. We've got maybe a week, 2 at most, before they organize something more serious, which means we need to be ready. Ready for what? He looked at her, his ice-blue eyes serious. War. Because that's what this is now. They won't stop until they've dragged you back to Iron Ridge or killed me trying. Maybe both. He paused. You can still leave. Head west, away from here. Start fresh somewhere they'll never find you. I'll give you supplies, money, everything you need. No shame in it. Elara thought about running, about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when Iron Ridge would catch up to her, about giving Marcus Webb and his father the satisfaction of driving her away from the first place she'd felt safe in 7 years. "No," she said. "I'm staying. If they want to fight, they'll get one." Ronan studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Then we'd better get you ready to survive one. Because when they come back, they won't be asking nicely. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources." The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the eastern peaks, Ronan woke Elara with a hand on her shoulder and a single word: "Up." She rolled out of bed, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. They'd both started sleeping that way after the confrontation, ready to move at a moment's notice. Outside, the air bit with pre-dawn cold that made her breath visible. "We're changing your training," Ronan said, handing her coffee that was somehow already brewed. "No more gentle introduction. You need to learn how to fight. Really fight. Not target practice or knife skills for skinning rabbits. Combat. How long do we have?" "Hard to say. Could be 3 days. Could be 10. Jonathan Webb will need time to gather men stupid enough to come up here, promise them enough money to make it worth their while, and organize an actual assault." He drained his coffee in 3 gulps. "But I'd rather be ready too early than too late." Over the next week, Elara discovered muscles she didn't know she had, and then watched them get systematically destroyed and rebuilt. Ronan was relentless. Every morning began with running, first along the valley floor, then up the slopes, then through the forest, where exposed roots and hidden rocks turned every step into a test. When she thought her lungs might burst, he'd make her do it again faster. "In a fight, you run or you die," he said when she collapsed against a tree, gasping. "The mountains are our advantage. We know them. They don't. But only if you can actually move through them when it counts." After running came hand-to-hand combat. Ronan showed her how to use her size, or lack of it, to her advantage, how to strike at vulnerable points, how to turn an opponent's strength against them. He didn't go easy on her. She learned by getting knocked down, by tasting blood, by discovering that pain was just information, and information could be used. "Again," he'd say, offering his hand to pull her up. "You dropped your guard when you went for the strike. That gets you killed." She'd get up and try again, get knocked down and get up, again and again until her body learned what her mind couldn't process fast enough: the muscle memory of survival. Afternoons were for weapons. The rifle first, until she could hit a target at 100 yards more often than not. Then the pistol, practicing draws and shots until her wrist ached from the recoil. Then the knife, learning the difference between a slash meant to disable and a thrust meant to kill. "You're not trying to win a duel," Ronan explained, demonstrating on a dummy he'd constructed from stuffed canvas. "You're trying to survive. That means fighting dirty, eyes, throat, groin. Whatever gives you the advantage. Honor gets you killed up here." But the most important lessons came in the evenings, when they'd sit on the porch and he'd teach her about the mountains themselves, how to use terrain as a weapon, how to set traps, how to move without being seen or heard, how to think like someone hunting you so you could stay ahead of them. "The Webb crew will be thinking like townsmen," he said one night, sketching rough maps in the dirt. "They'll stick to trails, move in groups, make noise. We use that against them, force them onto ground we choose, make them think they're hunting us while we're actually hurting them." Into what? Into realizing this was a mistake. Into going home, or... He paused, his face hardening. Into whatever comes if they don't have that much sense. On the 8th night after the confrontation, Elara woke to Ronan's hand over her mouth and his lips next to her ear. "They're coming, get dressed." Complete silence. Her heart hammered as she pulled on her boots, checked her pistol, grabbed the small pack they'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Ronan moved through the cabin like a ghost, gathering weapons and supplies with practiced efficiency. Outside, the moon was nearly full, painting everything in silver and shadow. "How many?" she whispered when they were outside. "At least 8, maybe more, coming up the main trail with torches like idiots." His teeth flashed in the moonlight. "We're not staying to defend the cabin. Too easy to pin us down, burn us out. We move to the high ground, make them chase us on our terms." They moved into the forest, And Elara was grateful for all those morning runs because now her body knew how to navigate in darkness, how to step silently, how to avoid the branches that would snap and give them away. Behind them, she could see the torchlight of the approaching men, hear their voices carrying in the still mountain air. Ronan led them up a steep slope to a rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley. From here they could see everything: the cabin, the stream, the trails. He settled into position behind a boulder and pulled out a small telescope, studying the approaching group. 12 men, maybe 13. I recognized most of them: miners from the web operation, a few townsmen looking for adventure and payment. He handed her the telescope. "Your turn. Tell me what you see." Elara looked through the glass, and the figures jumped into sharp focus. Marcus Webb, his arm still in a sling, riding at the front like this was some kind of noble quest. His father beside him, grim-faced. Sheriff Coleman. The rest were rough-looking men carrying rifles and torches, dressed for violence. "They're planning to burn the cabin," she said, spotting the extra torches tied to saddles. "Let them. It's wood and stone. Can be rebuilt." Ronan took the telescope back. "What else?" She thought about what he'd taught her. Read the terrain, read the enemy, find the advantage. "They're bunched up, moving slow. The horses are nervous in the dark." "Good. What else?" "They're loud. They think they're the hunters, so they're not worried about being hunted." She looked at him. "What's the plan?" "We split up. You take the southern ridge, I'll take the northern. We have clear lines of sight on the cabin from both positions. When they start their fire, we start ours. But we're shooting high, over their heads. Enough to scare them, make them panic. In the dark, with shots coming from two directions, they'll think there are more of us. They'll scatter. And then? Then we let the mountains do the rest. This valley has 3 ways out. We control all 3. They'll figure out real quick that coming up here was a bad idea." He handed her a rifle. "Remember what I taught you. Breathe. Aim. Fire. And whatever happens, don't let them see you. You see Marcus or his father getting close to your position, you move. They don't get to touch you. Clear?" "Clear." He gripped her shoulder once, brief but firm. "You're ready for this. Trust yourself." Then he was gone, moving through the darkness like smoke, and Elara was alone with her rifle and her hammering heart. She made her way to the southern ridge, finding the spot Ronan had shown her 3 days ago during one of their scouting runs. From here she had a perfect view of the cabin and the approaches. The Webb party reached the cabin 15 minutes later. She watched through her rifle scope as they dismounted, as Marcus pointed and gave orders, as men spread out with torches. 2 of them kicked in the cabin door. Not locked, because Ronan had said there was no point in locking something they weren't defending. They searched inside, came out shaking their heads. "They ran!" Marcus's voice carried clearly in the night air. "Cowards ran when they knew we were coming." "Or they're watching us right now," one of the miners said, nervous. "This doesn't feel right, Mr. Webb, being up here in the dark." "You're being paid to follow orders, not to think." Jonathan Webb's voice cracked like a whip. "Burn it. Burn it all. They want to hide in these mountains like animals. They can live like animals." Men touched torches to the cabin walls, to the door, to the roof. The dry wood caught fast, flames leaping upward, painting the valley in orange and red that reminded Elara too much of the night her parents died. She felt rage building in her chest, hot and tight, but forced it down. Emotion was the enemy right now. Cold calculation was what she needed. She waited until the flames were high and every man's attention was fixed on the burning cabin. Then she aimed high, just as Ronan had instructed, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the night like thunder. On the northern ridge, Ronan's rifle answered. Then Elara fired again. And again. Not aiming to kill, not yet, but placing shots close enough that the men below could hear the bullets whine past. Panic erupted. The horses screamed and bolted, 2 men still in their saddles getting carried away into the darkness. The rest scattered, diving behind rocks and trees, shouting conflicting orders. More shots from the north, more from the south. In the chaos and darkness and firelight, it must have seemed like they were surrounded by an entire army. "There's too many of them," someone shouted. "They've got us in a crossfire." "Hold your ground," Jonathan Webb roared, but his voice had lost its certainty. Elara shifted position, moved 20 yards east, fired again. It looked like the shots were coming from multiple locations, multiple shooters. On the ridge across from her, she could see muzzle flashes as Ronan did the same, each shot calculated to create maximum confusion. "Fall back!" Sheriff Coleman's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back to the tree line! We're sitting ducks here!" The men retreated, some running, some crawling, all of them desperate to escape the invisible enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. They reached the forest edge and huddled there, trying to regroup, their earlier bravado completely shattered. Ronan's voice boomed out of the darkness, amplified somehow. He'd mentioned something about acoustics, about how sound carried in the valley. "You came to my home, burned my property, threatened my woman, and you thought there would be no consequences?" The echoes made it impossible to pinpoint where he was speaking from. He sounded like he was everywhere and nowhere. "You're outnumbered and outgunned," Jonathan Webb shouted back. "Surrender now and we'll make it quick." "I'm not the one who's outnumbered. Count your men, Webb. Count them carefully. How many did you bring? How many can you still see?" Elara watched as Jonathan frantically looked around, trying to take inventory of his scattered, panicked force. In the darkness and confusion, it was impossible to tell. "You've got one chance to leave this mountain alive," Ronan continued. "You turn around, you walk back to Iron Ridge, and you never come back. You do that, and this ends here." "Like hell!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with fury and fear. "You think you can threaten us? We'll burn you out. We'll hunt you down. We'll—" The shot came so close to Marcus that it kicked up rock dust at his feet. He jumped back with a yelp that would have been funny if the situation wasn't so deadly serious. "The next one won't miss," Ronan said quietly, and somehow that quiet was more terrifying than shouting. "Choose now." Elara could see the debate happening below. Some of the men were already backing away, clearly done with this insanity. Others looked to the Webbs for guidance. Sheriff Coleman appeared to be arguing with Jonathan, gesturing back toward the trail. Then something unexpected happened. One of the miners, a big man with a beard, stepped forward into the firelight. "I'm done," he said loudly. "This ain't what I signed up for. I came to help bring back a woman who supposedly needed rescuing. But she don't sound like she needs rescuing. She sounds like she made a choice." He threw down his rifle. "Anyone else got sense enough to leave before we all get killed?" 3 more men stepped forward, laying down their weapons. "You walk away from this. You'll never work in my mine again." Jonathan's face was purple with rage. "Never work anywhere in Iron Ridge." "Then I guess I'm moving on." The bearded miner started walking toward the trail. "I ain't dying, so some rich man's son can feel better about getting rejected." The other 3 followed. Then 2 more. Within minutes, half of Jonathan's force had simply walked away, disappearing down the trail into darkness. That left Jonathan, Marcus, Sheriff Coleman, and 4 men who either were too loyal or too stupid to know when to quit. "You'll regret this," Jonathan said, but his voice had lost its power. "All of you. When we come back—" "You're not coming back." Ronan's voice cut through the night like a blade. "You're going to walk down that mountain, get on your horses, and ride back to your town. And if I ever see you on my land again, I won't shoot to miss. That's not a threat. That's a promise." For a long moment, nobody moved. The cabin burned, flames eating through the roof, casting wild shadows across the valley. 8 men faced an unseen enemy in terrain they didn't understand, with half their force already gone and their advantage evaporated. Finally, Sheriff Coleman made the decision for them. "We're leaving. This is federal land anyway, not our jurisdiction. We file proper paperwork, come back with marshals, do this the legal way." "You do that," Ronan said. "And while you're filing your paperwork, maybe mention how you burned a man's home without a warrant, threatened violence against a woman who came here willingly, and brought armed men onto federal land to enforce what amounts to slavery. See how the marshals feel about that." Coleman's face went pale in the firelight. He turned to Jonathan. "We're done here. Let's go." Marcus started to protest, but his father grabbed his good arm. "We'll settle this another way. Come on." They gathered their remaining men and retreated toward the trail. Elara kept her rifle trained on them until they disappeared into the trees, until even the sound of their passage had faded into silence. Then Ronan was beside her, materializing out of the darkness so suddenly she almost shot him. "Easy," he said. "It's me." "Is it over?" "For tonight. Maybe for good. Depends on how much pride they're willing to swallow. He looked down at the burning cabin, his face unreadable in the firelight. Well, looks like we're building a new home. I'm sorry. If I hadn't... Don't. He turned to face her. You have nothing to apologize for. They did this. Their pride, their cruelty, their inability to accept that a woman has the right to choose her own life. That's on them. They made their way back down to the valley. The cabin was beyond saving. The roof had already collapsed and the walls were going fast. But the stone fireplace stood intact, and the root cellar beneath was untouched. Ronan had built well enough that even in destruction, the bones of the structure remained. We'll camp tonight at the North Waypoint, he said, already moving, already planning. Tomorrow, we start salvaging what we can. The cabin can be rebuilt in a week if we work hard. They hiked through the darkness to the waypoint, that same sheltered clearing where they'd camped on their first night. Ronan built a fire and they sat beside it, not speaking, just processing everything that had happened. Finally, Elara said, You let them go. You could have killed them, but you didn't. Killing should be the last option, not the first. Those men, most of them were just following orders, trying to make some extra money. They didn't deserve to die for Jonathan Webb's wounded pride. He poked at the fire with a stick. The ones who walked away proved they had sense. The ones who stayed, they'll think twice before coming back. And if they don't? Then next time I won't shoot to miss. His voice was flat, factual. You defend yourself however you need to. That's the only rule that matters up here. Elara thought about the hours they'd spent on the ridge, about the weight of the rifle in her hands, about the moment when she could have shifted her aim lower and ended Marcus Webb's life with a simple trigger pull. She'd been ready to do it. That knowledge should have terrified her, but instead it felt like power, cold and heavy and absolute. I would have shot him, she said quietly, if he'd come for me. I would have killed him. I know. I saw it in your eyes when you were aiming. Ronan looked at her across the fire. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's survival. That's strength. Is it? Or is it just becoming like them? There's a difference between defending yourself and attacking the innocent. You were defending. That's never wrong. He stood and walked to the edge of the firelight, staring out into the darkness. My sister, the one I told you about, she died because she couldn't fight back. Couldn't see that her life was worth defending. You're not her. You're a fighter. That's why you're still here. They slept that night with one of them always on watch, rifles close, ready for the possibility that Webb might double back. But the mountain remained quiet except for the normal sounds of night creatures and wind in the trees. Dawn came cold and clear. They hiked back to the valley and spent the day sorting through the ruins of the cabin. The fire had been thorough, but some things survived. Tools from the root cellar, the iron cookware, some of the books that had been stored in the stone-lined lower shelves. Everything else was ash and memory. We'll build it bigger this time, Ronan said, already pacing out dimensions. 2 rooms instead of 1. Proper shutters that can be barred. Maybe a second door for emergencies. Over the next week, they worked from dawn until dark. Ronan felled trees with an axe that moved like an extension of his body, and Elara learned to strip bark and notch logs for fitting. They built a temporary shelter from canvas and salvaged materials, enough to keep them dry while they worked on the real structure. The physical labor was brutal but meditative. There was something almost cleansing about it, taking the destruction that hate had created and transforming it into something stronger. Each log they placed was an act of defiance. Each wall they raised was proof that they wouldn't be driven out. On the 5th day, Elara was notching a support beam when she heard Ronan call her name. She looked up to find him standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at something on the ground. What is it? Tracks. Fresh. Someone's been watching us. Her hand went automatically to the pistol at her hip. She'd started wearing it everywhere, even to sleep. Webb's men? No. Wrong boot pattern. And they're too careful. Webb's crew moves like a herd of cattle. This is someone else. He knelt, studying the prints with the intensity of someone reading a book. Single person, male, based on the stride length and weight distribution. Skilled tracker. They stayed downwind, kept to hard ground except for this one slip. They've been watching us for at least 3 days. 3 days? Why haven't they approached? That's the question. He stood, his face troubled. Someone who watches instead of approaching is either waiting for something or planning something. Neither option is good. That night they took turns on watch again, but the mysterious watcher didn't reveal themselves. The next day, more tracks appeared, circling the valley, always staying just out of rifle range, never coming close enough to be confronted. "It's like they're studying us," Elara said. "That's exactly what they're doing. Question is why?" Ronan checked his rifle for the third time. "We keep working, keep building, but stay alert. Anyone approaches, we treat them as hostile until proven otherwise." 2 more days passed. The cabin's frame was taking shape, the walls rising log by log. Alara's hands were raw despite the calluses, her muscles screamed, but she kept working. This was her home now, her choice. And no one, not Webb, not some mysterious watcher, was going to take it from her. On the 8th day, the watcher finally showed himself. Elara saw him first, a figure standing at the tree line on the eastern slope, making no attempt to hide. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothes that had seen hard use, with a rifle slung across his back and something about his stance that suggested military training. "Ronan," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the figure. He was beside her in seconds, his own rifle in hand. "I see him." The man raised both hands, showing they were empty, then started walking toward them slowly. No sudden movements, no threatening gestures, just steady, confident approach. He stopped 30 feet away, still keeping his hands visible. Up close, Elara could see he was maybe 40, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of slate. A scar ran from his right eyebrow into his hairline, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who'd been hurt badly and learned from it. "Ronan Hale," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Who's asking?" "Name's Cole Brennan. I own the land adjacent to yours, about 8 miles northeast, higher up in the peaks." He glanced at the rising cabin. "Heard you had some trouble with townsmen. Watched them come up, watched them burn your place, watched you run them off. Impressive tactics." "You've been watching us for over a week. Why?" "Wanted to see what kind of people you were. Whether you'd run, fight, or break. Whether you understood these mountains or if you were just playing at wilderness living." Cole's expression was neutral, giving nothing away. "A lot of people come up here thinking they'll carve out some romantic life away from civilization. Most of them don't last a winter. The ones who do last usually aren't good neighbors." "And your assessment?" "You know what you're doing. The woman—" He nodded at Elara. "She's learning fast. I watched her on that southern ridge during the fight. Steady hands, good discipline. Didn't panic when it got loud. Still not hearing why you're here." Ronan's rifle hadn't moved, still ready, still aimed at center mass. Cole's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Because the Webb family doesn't give up easy. I know Jonathan Webb. Our families go back 3 generations. He's stubborn, prideful, and mean when he feels disrespected. He'll come back. Maybe not this month, maybe not this year, but eventually his pride will eat at him until he has to try again." "And you're telling me this out of neighborly concern?" "I'm telling you this because I don't like the Webb family, because I've seen what they do to the land they own, the people they employ, the communities they control. Because when I heard they were coming up here to drag a woman back against her will, it reminded me of things I'd rather forget." His eyes flicked to Elara, and she saw understanding there, not pity, but recognition. "I'm offering an alliance. You watch my land, I watch yours. Threats come, we face them together. The mountains are hard enough without fighting alone." Ronan was quiet for a long moment, studying Cole with the same intensity Cole was using to study him. Finally, he lowered his rifle. "You have coffee at your place?" "I do." "Then I guess we should talk properly. But first, why'd you really come down here? The alliance offer could have been made a week ago." Cole's face went serious. "Because yesterday, a rider came through the peaks, federal marshal asking questions about a mountain man and a scarred woman. Webb filed his paperwork, made formal complaints, accused you of kidnapping, destruction of property, assault." He paused. "The marshal's coming to investigate. Could be here in 3 days, maybe 4. The weight of that information settled over the clearing like snow. Elara felt her stomach drop. "They're sending the law?" Webb knows he can't beat you up here with hired guns, so he's using the system instead. Smart, if you're a bastard who doesn't care about truth. Cole looked between them. You two need to decide what you're going to do when that marshal arrives. Because one way or another, this situation is coming to a head. Ronan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Then we'd better figure out our story, and figure it out fast. Cole Brennan's cabin sat in a high saddle between two peaks, positioned so that anyone approaching could be seen from miles away. It was smaller than Ronan's burned structure, but built with the same attention to defensibility. Thick walls, narrow windows, a door that looked like it could withstand a battering ram. Inside, it was sparse but functional, every item serving a purpose. They sat around a rough-hewn table, coffee steaming in tin cups, while Cole spread out a hand-drawn map of the region. The marshal's name is Thomas Garrett. He's out of Denver, been with the Federal Service for 15 years. He's got a reputation for being fair but thorough, won't take bribes, won't be intimidated, but he also won't ignore evidence. Cole tapped the map where Iron Ridge sat in its valley. Webb filed 3 formal complaints: kidnapping, assault with intent to do bodily harm, and destruction of property during the confrontation on the trail. Destruction of property? Ronan's voice dripped sarcasm. Marcus pulled a knife on me. I broke his wrist in self-defense. Webb's claiming you attacked unprovoked. Says you were drunk and violent, that you grabbed Miss Vance during the dance and physically forced her to leave town. Cole looked at Elara. He's also claiming you were coerced, that you couldn't possibly have gone willingly because, and I'm quoting the filing here, no woman of sound mind would choose to live in squalor with a violent hermit when she had a respectable life in civilized society. Elara felt rage bubble up her throat. Respectable life? They tormented me for 7 years. They treated me like I was less than human because of my scars. I believe you. The question is whether Marshal Garrett will. Cole pulled out another paper. Webb also has 12 sworn statements from witnesses claiming you appeared distressed at the dance, that Ronan threatened violence if anyone interfered, and that you only agreed to leave out of fear for your safety. That's a lie. Every word of it. Probably. But lies backed by 12 signatures carry weight with the law. Cole leaned back in his chair. Here's what you're facing. When Garrett arrives, he'll separate you two, question you independently, look for inconsistencies. If your stories don't match perfectly, he'll assume coercion. If he determines kidnapping occurred, he's legally obligated to return Miss Vance to Iron Ridge and arrest you, Ronan. After that, it goes to trial, and juries tend to believe wealthy mine owners over mountain men. So we run? Elara asked. Running makes you look guilty. Webb probably expects that, might even prefer it. Gives him a reason to put a bounty on your heads, turn this into a manhunt. Cole drummed his fingers on the table. No, you need to face this directly, but you need leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that makes Webb wish he'd never filed those papers. Cole's expression turned calculating. I've spent the last 2 days in Iron Ridge, asking questions, listening to gossip, talking to people who have no love for the Webb family, and I found something interesting. He pulled out a small leather journal and slid it across the table. This belonged to a miner named Samuel Porter. He died 3 months ago in a cave-in at Webb's mine. His widow gave it to me when I told her I was investigating safety violations. Ronan opened the journal and began reading, his expression darkening with each page. After a few minutes, he looked up. They knew. Webb knew the support timbers were rotting. Porter documented warnings, complaints, 3 separate requests for repairs. All ignored because replacing the timbers would mean shutting down that section for 2 weeks and losing profit. Porter wasn't the only one who died because of those timbers. 7 men in total. Webb paid off the families, paid off the territorial inspector, made the whole thing disappear. Cole's voice was hard. But Porter's widow kept the journal. She's willing to testify if she has protection from Webb's retaliation. This is leverage? Elara asked. This is a felony. Multiple counts of criminal negligence resulting in death. If this goes to a federal prosecutor, Webb faces prison time. His mind gets shut down pending investigation. His reputation, which is all that holds his power together, gets destroyed. Cole smiled grimly. Men like Jonathan Webb will do anything to protect their empires, even drop false charges against a mountain man. Ronan closed the journal carefully. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about evening the odds. Webb used the legal system as a weapon against you. This lets you use it back. Cole met his eyes. The question is whether you're willing to fight that dirty. I've fought dirtier to survive less, Ronan said. But if we do this, we do it right. No halfway measures. We make sure Webb can never come after us again. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Cole made another trip to Iron Ridge, this time accompanied by Elara, who wore a hood to hide her distinctive scars. They met with Porter's widow in secret, obtained her sworn statement, and gathered corroborating evidence from 2 other miners willing to testify. Cole also made quiet contact with 3 of the men who'd walked away during the attack on the cabin, the bearded miner and his friends, who were willing to provide statements about what really happened that night. Webb's been telling everyone that his men were ambushed, that you opened fire without warning, Cole explained when they returned to his cabin. These 3 will testify that Webb ordered them to burn your property, that you only fired after the cabin was already burning, and that you deliberately shot high to avoid casualties. Will their word be enough? Elara asked. Combined with everything else? Maybe. The goal isn't to win in court, it's to make sure this never gets to court. To make Webb understand that pursuing you will cost him more than his pride can afford. On the 3rd day, Marshal Thomas Garrett arrived. They spotted him from Cole's observation point, a lone rider on a sturdy gray horse, moving up the trail with the steady pace of someone who'd traveled far and wasn't in a hurry. He was middle-aged and solid, with a marshal's star pinned to his coat and the weathered look of a man who'd spent years in the saddle enforcing federal law in rough territory. He's coming up alone, Ronan observed through the telescope. That's either very confident or very stupid. Garrett's neither. He's calculated. Coming alone says he's not here for a fight, just to investigate. Cole stood. Let him reach your valley. Meet him there, on your ground. Show him you're not hiding. They rode down to Ronan's valley, where the new cabin was half built, its frame rising like bones from the ashes of the old. Marshal Garrett arrived an hour later, reining in his horse at the edge of the clearing. His hand rested casually near his sidearm, but he made no move to draw. Ronan Hale? His voice was gravelly but not unfriendly. That's me? I'm Marshal Thomas Garrett. I'm here to investigate allegations made by Jonathan Webb of Iron Ridge. Are you familiar with these allegations? I'm familiar with Webb's lies, if that's what you're asking. Garrett dismounted, keeping his movements slow and visible. I'd appreciate if we could keep this civil, Mr. Hale. I'm here to gather facts, not to make arrests unless warranted. I'd like to speak with you, and then separately with Miss Elara Vance. Is she here? I'm here. Elara stepped forward, pushing back her hood so her scars were fully visible. She saw Garrett's eyes flick to them, then away, not with disgust, but with the professional neutrality of someone who'd seen worse. Miss Vance, Mr. Webb claims you were taken from Iron Ridge against your will on the night of September 28th. Is that accurate? No, sir. I left voluntarily. He also claims Mr. Hale threatened violence at the courtship dance, that you only agreed to leave with him out of fear. Is that accurate? No, sir. Ronan offered me a choice. I made it freely. Garrett pulled out a small notebook and began writing. I'll need detailed statements from both of you. But first, I'd like to understand the broader context. Miss Vance, what was your situation in Iron Ridge prior to leaving? Elara took a breath and began talking. She told him about the fire, about the 7 years of isolation and mockery, about the courtship dance and the systematic humiliation. She told him about Marcus Webb and his friends, about the public cruelty that everyone in town had witnessed, but no one had stopped. She spoke calmly, factually, without emotion, just laying out the truth like items on a table. Garrett listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across the pages. When she finished, he turned to Ronan. And you, Mr. Hale, what motivated you to claim Miss Vance at the dance? I saw a strong woman being broken by weak people. Decided to do something about it. Ronan's voice was flat. I made an offer. She accepted. We left. Everything after that, Marcus and his friends attacking me with knives, Webb and his men burning my home. That's on them, not us. 3 men claim you attacked them without provocation on the trail out of Iron Ridge. They have medical documentation of injuries. Broken wrist, broken nose, severe bruising. They pulled knives on me first. I defended myself. I can show you the spot where it happened. There's still blood on the rocks, and you'll find their knives in the weeds where I threw them. Self-defense isn't a crime. Garrett made more notes. And the night Webb's men came here? They claim you opened fire without warning, that you used military tactics to ambush them. They burned my home. I fired warning shots to drive them off. If I'd wanted to kill them, they'd be dead. There were 12 of them and 2 of us, and we had high ground and clear shots. The only reason they're alive to lie about it is because I showed restraint. 2 of you? Garrett looked at Elara with new assessment. I can shoot, Marshal. Ronan taught me, and yes, I was on that ridge. Yes, I fired at men who'd come to burn our home and drag me back to a town that treated me like garbage for 7 years. She met his eyes directly. Are you going to arrest me for defending my home? For the first time, something like a smile crossed Garrett's weathered face. No, ma'am. Not unless you actually killed someone. Did you? No, sir. We shot high on purpose. Well then. He closed his notebook. Let's talk about what happens next. Mr. Webb wants me to arrest Mr. Hale and return you to Iron Ridge for your own protection. Based on what I've heard, I'm not inclined to do either. But I do need to verify your stories independently. Miss Vance, would you be willing to ride to the territorial capital with me, make a formal statement, and undergo medical examination to ensure you're not being held through physical coercion? Elara felt Ronan tense beside her, but she nodded. I'll go, but I need your word that I'm coming back here after, that this isn't a trick to separate us. You have my word, and for what it's worth, Garrett looked between them. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I can usually tell when someone's being coerced. You don't have the look of a victim, Miss Vance. You have the look of someone who made a choice and is prepared to defend it. That's exactly what I am. Then we'll ride out tomorrow morning. Mr. Hale, you're not under arrest, but I'd advise you to stay close. I'll need to corroborate some details, and the territorial judge will want to speak with you before making any final determinations. Cole Brennan, who'd been standing quietly at the edge of the clearing, finally spoke. Marshal, before you make any recommendations to the territorial authorities, there's something you should see. He produced Porter's journal and laid out the evidence of Webb's negligence. The dead miners, the ignored warnings, the paid-off inspections. Garrett's expression grew darker with each page he read. Where did you get this? From a widow who wants justice for her husband. And I can provide you with 3 more witnesses willing to testify, plus documentation of similar violations at 2 other Webb properties. Cole's voice was hard. Jonathan Webb filed charges against these people to distract from his own crimes. He's using the legal system to persecute the innocent while he profits from the deaths of working men. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, staring at the journal. These are serious allegations. These are felonies, multiple counts, federal jurisdiction because the mines cross territorial boundaries. Cole leaned forward. Question is, Marshal, are you here to serve justice or to serve the man with the biggest wallet? I serve the law, which means I investigate all crimes, not just the convenient ones. Garrett carefully wrapped the journal in oilcloth. This evidence will be submitted to the territorial prosecutor. An investigation will be opened into Webb's mining operations. If these allegations prove true, he'll face charges. And the charges against Mr. Hale? I'll make my recommendation to the judge after I've completed my investigation. But between you and me, Garrett looked at Ronan, self-defense is self-defense, and from what I've seen, Webb brought this on himself. The marshal left that evening, riding back down the mountain with promises to return in 3 days. Elara spent those days helping finish the cabin, trying to keep her mind occupied, trying not to think about what would happen if Garrett decided Webb's money and influence were more important than truth. He seemed fair, she said on the second night, lying beside Ronan in their temporary shelter. Seeming and being are different things. We won't know until he comes back. Ronan's arm tightened around her. But if he tries to take you, he'll have to go through me first. That's not helpful if he's actually trying to help us. I've learned not to trust authority figures. They tend to side with people like Webb. Cole said Garrett has a reputation for honesty. Cole also said Webb has 12 witnesses willing to lie under oath. Reputation doesn't mean much against organized corruption. He turned to face her in the darkness. But if it goes bad, if Garrett comes back with arrest warrants or tries to force you to return, I want you to run. Head to Cole's place. Let him get you out of the territory. Start somewhere new. I'm not running without you. Elara, oh, no. I spent 7 years in Iron Ridge accepting that I had no power, no choice, no say in my own life. I'm not going back to that. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's not negotiable." He was quiet for a moment, then pulled her closer. "You're the stubbornest person I've ever met. I learned from the best." Garrett returned on the third day, but he wasn't alone. Riding beside him was a woman in her 40s wearing a traveling dress and carrying a leather document case. She had the no-nonsense air of someone accustomed to authority. "This is Judge Margaret Holloway," Garrett said as they dismounted. "She's the territorial circuit judge, and she wanted to handle this case personally." Judge Holloway studied the half-built cabin, then Ronan and Elara, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Hale, Miss Vance, Marshal Garrett has briefed me on the situation. I've also reviewed the evidence Mr. Brennan provided regarding Mr. Webb's mining operations. Before I make any rulings, I'd like to hear your side of things directly." They talked for 2 hours. The judge asked pointed questions, pushed for details, tested their stories for inconsistencies. She examined Elara's scars, asked about her life in Iron Ridge, questioned her understanding of what living in the mountains would mean. She toured the burned cabin site, examined the evidence of the attack, even had Garrett sketch out the positions everyone had held during the firefight. Finally, she sat at the makeshift table and opened her document case. "Here's what I've determined. First, regarding the kidnapping charge, there is no evidence whatsoever that Miss Vance was taken against her will. Every aspect of her testimony is consistent, credible, and supported by her actions. The courtship tradition, as practiced in Iron Ridge, allows women to accept or refuse offers. Miss Vance accepted. That's the end of it." Elara felt relief wash through her so powerfully she thought she might collapse. Second, regarding the assault charges, Mr. Hale clearly acted in self-defense when attacked by armed men. I'm dismissing those charges entirely. Furthermore, I'm issuing a warrant for Marcus Webb's arrest on charges of assault with a deadly weapon. He'll be given the opportunity to surrender voluntarily. Ronan's expression didn't change, but Elara saw his shoulders relax slightly. Third, regarding the property destruction, Jonathan Webb's men burned a legal residence on federal land without authority. That's arson, and it's a federal crime. I'm issuing warrants for Mr. Webb and Sheriff Coleman, who led the raid. They'll claim they were pursuing a criminal, Cole said, which they were not, as I've just established Mr. Hale committed no crime. No, gentlemen, the Webb family is about to learn that money doesn't place you above the law. Judge Holloway's voice was steel. I've also forwarded the evidence regarding the mining violations to the federal prosecutor in Denver. An investigation is underway. If the allegations prove true, Jonathan Webb will spend the next decade in prison. What about retaliation? Elara asked. Webb won't just accept this. He'll try to hurt us some other way. Which is why I'm issuing a protective order. Jonathan Webb, Marcus Webb, and anyone acting on their behalf are prohibited from coming within 5 miles of this property. Violation will result in immediate arrest and imprisonment. The judge signed several documents with quick, efficient strokes. You're also hereby granted clear title to this land, 40 acres surrounding your cabin. It's federal land, but I'm authorizing a homestead claim in recognition of the improvements you've made and the injustices you've suffered. Elara couldn't speak. 40 acres. Legal protection. The charges dropped. It was more than she'd hoped for, more than she'd allowed herself to imagine. Thank you, Ronan said quietly. Don't thank me. Thank Mr. Brennan for doing the investigative work, and thank yourselves for having the courage to face this directly rather than running. Judge Holloway stood. I'll be honest with you both. You've made powerful enemies. Even with these orders, the Webbs will look for ways to hurt you. Be careful. Be vigilant. And if they violate any part of these orders, you send word immediately. She and Marshal Garrett left that afternoon, riding back toward civilization with their signed oath documents and their warrants. Cole stayed long enough to share a drink of whiskey he'd been saving. It's not over, he warned. Webb's cornered now, which makes him dangerous. A man who's lost everything will do things a man with something to lose won't. Let him try, Ronan said. We'll be ready. But weeks passed, and Webb didn't come. Word filtered up through the mountains, carried by passing trappers and traveling merchants, that Jonathan Webb had been arrested attempting to flee the territory, that Marcus had been found in a Denver gambling house, trying to drink away his father's disgrace. That the web mine had been shut down pending investigation, throwing 200 men out of work and devastating Iron Ridge's economy. "The whole town's falling apart," one trapper reported, accepting coffee at their newly completed cabin. "Half the businesses have closed. Families are leaving. Someone burned down the town hall last month, probably angry miners who lost their jobs. It's becoming a ghost town." Elara tried to feel something about that. Sympathy, vindication, anything. But all she felt was relief that she wasn't there to see it. Iron Ridge was dying, but she'd already left that corpse behind. Autumn deepened into winter. The first snows came, blanketing the valley in white silence. Ronan taught Elara how to survive the cold, how to insulate the cabin, how to hunt in snow, how to read the signs of approaching storms. They worked side by side, stocking the root cellar, splitting firewood, preparing for the brutal months ahead. Cole became a regular visitor, stopping by every few weeks to share news and supplies. Others came too, trappers and mountain men who'd heard about the fight with Webb, who respected what Ronan and Elara had done. Word spread through the high country that this valley was a place where people who'd been rejected by civilization could find acceptance. "You're building something here," Cole observed one evening as they sat around the fire. "Not just a cabin, a community, a place for people who don't fit anywhere else." "Maybe," Ronan said. "Or maybe we're just surviving the best way we know how." But Elara thought Cole might be right. Over the winter, 3 more people came to settle nearby. A widow fleeing an abusive family, a black man who'd faced discrimination in every town he'd tried to settle, a young woman with a clubfoot who'd been deemed unmarriageable. Ronan helped them all find land, build shelters, learn the skills they'd need to survive. By spring, when the snow melted and the aspens turned green again, there were 7 cabins in the high valleys, 7 families who'd chosen freedom over acceptance, isolation over persecution, hard truth over comfortable lies. One morning in late May, Elara stood on the porch of their cabin and looked out over the valley. The stream ran high with snowmelt. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from Cole's chimney, from the widow's cabin, from all the small signs of life they'd built in this impossible place. Ronan came to stand beside her, his arms settling around her shoulders. "Any regrets?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. Thought about the easy life she could have had if she'd been born with an unmarked face. Thought about the hypothetical husband and children and respectable existence that Iron Ridge had told her she didn't deserve. Thought about all the things she'd supposedly given up by choosing this rough, hard, isolated life. "None," she said. "Not a single one." "Good, because I was thinking—" He paused, seeming almost nervous, which was strange for a man who faced down bears and armed attacks without flinching. "Cole mentioned there's a minister who travels through the high country once a year. He'll be here next month." "And?" "And I thought maybe we could make this official. The claiming, the courtship." He turned to face her, his ice-blue eyes intense. "I know I didn't do this properly. Didn't ask your father's permission, didn't give you time to think, didn't offer you the kind of respectable courtship you might have wanted." "Ronan," she put her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating fast. "I don't want respectable. I want real. I want what we have, this partnership, this equality, this life we've built where I'm not judged by my scars or my past or what anyone else thinks I should be. That's worth more than every proper courtship in the world. So that's a yes?" "That's a yes." He kissed her there on the porch, with the morning sun warming their faces and the mountains rising around them like walls against the world. And for the first time in 7 years, Elara Vance felt beautiful. Not despite her scars, but because of everything they represented: survival, strength, the courage to keep standing when life tried to break her. The minister came in June, a circuit rider with a Bible worn soft from use, and eyes that had seen everything twice. He married them in the meadow beside the stream, with Cole and the widow and all their unlikely neighbors standing as witnesses. It wasn't fancy. There were no silk dresses or formal suits, no huge celebration or expensive gifts. Just 2 people promising to face the mountains together, to build something lasting out of the ruins of what they'd escaped. That night, as they lay in their bed in their cabin on their land, Elara traced the scars on Ronan's hands, the marks left by axes and knives, and the brutal work of survival. "We match," she said quietly. "We do." Iron Ridge used to tell me my scars made me broken, damaged, unworthy of being loved. Iron Ridge was wrong about everything that mattered. He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. Your scars are proof that you survived, that you're strong enough to face whatever comes. That's not damage, that's power. She thought about the girl she'd been, 17 years old, standing in the ashes of her parents' house, watching the only life she'd known burn away. That girl had been terrified, broken, certain that her future held nothing but pain. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, the 7 years of mockery, the public rejections, the constant grinding cruelty, that girl would have given up. But if she could tell her about this moment, about lying in a cabin she'd helped build, beside a man who saw her scars as strength, surrounded by people who'd chosen freedom over acceptance, that girl might have found hope in the darkness. The marked woman of Iron Ridge, Elara whispered, trying out the phrase that had defined her for so long. No, Ronan corrected gently. Elara Hale, woman of the high country, survivor, fighter, mine. Yours, she agreed, and meant it, with everything she had. Outside, the mountain stood eternal under the stars, indifferent to human judgment, unconcerned with society's rules about who deserved happiness and who didn't. The wind moved through the pines with the sound of distant music. Somewhere in the valley, a wolf howled, not threatening, just singing its existence to the night. And in a small cabin carved from wilderness and stubbornness and the refusal to accept that scars defined worth, two people who'd been rejected by civilization found everything they needed in each other. The story that had begun with humiliation and fire ended with choice and freedom. The woman the town had marked as unworthy became a legend in the high country, not for her beauty or her tragedy, but for her strength. People would speak her name in the years to come, would tell stories about the scarred woman who refused to break, who walked away from comfort into hardship and built something better than what she'd left behind. Iron Ridge faded into history, its buildings reclaimed by weather and time, its cruelties forgotten by everyone except those who'd suffered them. But in the high valleys, where the air was thin and life was hard, Elara's legacy endured, a testament to the truth that survival is its own kind of triumph, that strength comes in forms society refuses to recognize, and that sometimes the only way to find your worth is to walk away from everyone who told you that you didn't have any. She'd been marked by fire, marked by cruelty, marked as unworthy. But in the end, she'd marked herself as a survivor, as a fighter, as someone who refused to let others define her story. And that mark, the one she'd carved into her own soul through sheer determination, was the only one that had ever mattered.